Albuquerque Police, how can I help you?
Yes, this is Harry Gendert. I'm at my sister's house, and she's not here. And I haven't been able to get a hold of her, and she usually gets back to me because I call her every morning and night, and she has, and the phone has been offline.
Okay. And what's your sister's name?
Marilyn Gander.
This is Albuquerque Police Department. Coming inside, you need to make your presence known. Don't come to the front door with your hands open and empty. Do it now.
We think we found a body out here. Somebody has put it on like a mattress or something and burned it. And it looks like it has bones in it, and you can see intestines and guts and.
It looks like it has lips and teeth in there.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if it's real or.
I already know what happened.
Tell me what you think's happening.
No, just don't like the way I'm being approached and questioned.
They said, I'm too old. Will you please kill me?
In a city where neighbors waved across fences and morning routines rarely changed, Marilyn Gander stood out not because she demanded attention, but because she was reliable, kind, and consistent. She didn't live dangerously. She didn't seek drama. She delivered the mail, smiled at strangers, fed the dogs along her route, and then, one day, she vanished. When they found her, it wasn't in her neighborhood. It wasn't in her home. It was out on a forgotten back road in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. Desert terrain, empty, silent, and waiting. A passerby noticed the smoke. At first, it could have been anything, a brush fire, a pile of debris. But as they got closer, the truth crawled into view. It was a body, burned, charred beyond recognition, left there like garbage. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't random. This was personal. Marilyn's death wasn't an act of chaos. It was a decision, cold, calculated, and designed to send a message, make her disappear. Because when police began to pull the threads, when they traced Marilyn's final steps and opened the door to her private life, they found something most weren't ready to hear. The people who killed her weren't strangers. They weren't prowlers in the dark. They were family. This is the case of Marilyn Gander. And the fire they started to bury her truth only made it impossible to ignore. Marilyn Rose Gander lived a life that, on the surface, looked simple, quiet, normal. The kind of life you'd drive past without thinking twice, but look closer and you'd find a woman whose warmth stretched across an entire neighborhood. Born on December 19, 1952, in Las Vegas, New Mexico, Marilyn grew up in a time where family meant everything, and hard work wasn't a choice. It was a way of life. In her adult life, Marilyn settled in Albuquerque, New Mexico. For over 30 years, she worked as a mail carrier. Marilyn was a caregiver at heart, always offering help when someone needed a hand. She believed in second chances. She believed in family. That generosity, however, came at a cost. Over time, her household became more chaotic. She had taken in her daughter-in-law, her grandson, and a woman connected to them. The people Marilyn had tried to support were no longer just house guests. They were squatters. They didn't pay rent. They didn't respect the space. They damaged her home, drained her resources, and slowly chipped away at the peace she had worked so hard to build. And eventually, she made the hardest decision of all. She told them it was time to leave. As the situation inside Marilyn's home grew tense, those closest to her began to view her not as a protector, but as a barrier.
Hi, can you come on out a second?
Yeah.
So, what's going on?
I'm moving out.
Okay, what's your name?
Alyssa.
And the owner knows you're here getting your stuff?
She on Friday, she said come on Saturday morning and get the key.
January 26, 2018 began like any other day in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They didn't see Marilyn Gander. She hadn't shown up to work. She hadn't called in. Her phone rang but went unanswered. Friends and neighbors knew Marilyn well. She wasn't the type to disappear. She had a route, a rhythm, a quiet discipline to her daily life. Her animals were left unattended. There were no signs of a trip, no messages left behind. A welfare check was requested. Police visited her home, What they found wasn't chaos. It was worse. It was still, lifeless, too clean. The next day across town in Rio Rancho, a man driving down a quiet stretch of desert road saw something unexpected. Smoke drifting low and steady across the landscape. At first it looked like brush fire, but as he got closer, the smell changed. Thick, sour, unmistakable, burning flesh. He stopped his vehicle and walked cautiously toward the source. What he saw turned his stomach and sent him scrambling for his phone.
We think we found a body out here. Somebody had put it on like a mattress or something and burned it. It looks like it has bones in it, and you can see intestines and guts. And
It was a human body, badly burned, dumped carelessly in the dirt, charred beyond recognition. There were no clothes, no belongings, no markers of identity. Just scorched earth and horror. Authorities quickly descended on the scene. The area was cordoned off. Crime scene investigators picked through ashes, searching for any shred of evidence the fire hadn't consumed. It was immediately clear this wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of destruction. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted the person dead. They wanted them gone.
Like it looks like it has lips and teeth in there.
okay, yeah.
I don't know if it's real or.
Yeah, it's creepy.
It might be exactly what we think it is. So
Detectives quickly began to connect the dots. A missing woman in Albuquerque, a burned body in Rio Rancho. Dental records were pulled, tissue samples tested. The confirmation came swiftly. The body in the desert was Marilyn Gandert. The realization struck like lightning. A beloved mail carrier, known for her gentleness and consistency, had not simply vanished. She had been murdered, brutally, silently, and dumped like garbage by someone who wanted the world to forget her. But fire doesn't destroy everything. Forensics revealed that accelerants had been used to ignite the blaze. The type of fire starters suggested knowledge, intentional placement to prolong the burn. Yet even in the wake of such deliberate destruction, the body still told its story. Fragments of her clothing had melted into the earth. Her jaw, left partially intact, helped confirm her identity. Back in Albuquerque, suspicion immediately turned inward. Investigators began looking closely at Marilyn's personal life. The people living under her roof, the ones she had taken in and helped, suddenly became persons of interest. Their behavior during initial questioning had already raised flags.
It just clears a few things up for us.
No, that's fine. I said I'm gonna come by in about an hour for the keys. I don't have but I told her when I am, and see, she wasn't answering me, but she doesn't always answer me.
So the last one you got from her
Was at 10:35 on the 26th. That was the Friday.
Okay.
But she was here that day, and we were hanging out.
Do you know where she would be right now?
I don't, and that's
Because somebody's trying to report her as missing. Because Marilyn's being entered as a missing person, they want us to do a walkthrough on this house.
Okay, that's fine. Perfectly fine. I have no problem.
I appreciate it, Alyssa. Just one, it's a box to check. Right, where are you moving to?
Well,
Oh, no.
This one?
I had it a little close.
You're getting there.
I'm getting there. You can open that door if you want. That's a closet. She didn't come yesterday, and I expected her to come by, but I didn't think anything of it. I thought, she probably just,
Right.
sometimes she gets mad and won't even talk to me, and she's mad at me, but she has been pretty cordial with me. I said, I'm just trying to get my stuff out.
But now, with the weight of this discovery, detectives started asking harder questions. Why hadn't her family reported her missing? Why were they so calm? And why did their stories not line up? The evidence began to mount. Marilyn had been last seen at home. There was no sign of a break-in, no indication of an outside threat. Whoever had harmed her had access to her home, her trust, and her routine. Investigators grew increasingly confident. This was an inside job. Police obtained surveillance footage, pored over receipts, and analyzed phone data. In time, a chilling sequence began to form. A vehicle matching the description of one owned by Marilyn's grandson was seen traveling toward Rio Rancho late the night she disappeared. Cell tower pings confirmed multiple phones near the burn site. Gasoline purchases were made. Marilyn's phone went dark. And then, the texts. Digital forensics recovered deleted messages between Marilyn's grandson and daughter-in-law. They spoke in fragments, like people trying not to say too much, but saying enough to damn themselves. References to getting her out and handling it echoed with malevolent clarity. What was once a missing person case was now a full-fledged homicide investigation. And the suspects, they weren't strangers. They were the very people Marilyn had opened her door to. The crime was no longer just about violence. It was about betrayal. With Marilyn Gander's identity confirmed and her body pulled from the ashes of the Rio Rancho desert, investigators faced one critical question. Who did this, and why? The brutality of the crime pointed to something personal. This wasn't random. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a stranger passing through town. This was intimate, controlled, angry. The killer, or killers, had taken time to burn her body, douse it in accelerant, and leave it in a location carefully chosen for its isolation. That level of cruelty didn't feel opportunistic. It felt calculated. Detectives returned to the one place where Marilyn's final hours might make sense, her home. Inside her North Valley residence, everything appeared still, almost untouched. Her personal belongings were neatly in place. There was no sign of forced entry, no blood, no broken furniture. But to the trained eye, that kind of stillness was unnerving. It suggested a quiet crime, something that happened without struggle or with preparation. The first thing investigators noted was who had access to the house. Marilyn had recently been living with her daughter-in-law, her grandson, and a woman connected to them. She had opened her doors to them during hard times, and according to neighbors, they'd been staying with her for months. But recently, things had soured. Marilyn had confided in a friend that she was preparing to evict them. She said they were disrespecting her property. She was tired of the mess, the damage, the lack of rent, and the growing tension inside her own walls. When police asked the trio about Marilyn's whereabouts, their answers were vague and scattered. Her grandson said he hadn't seen her since the previous day.
When's the last time you talked to your grandma?
I would say 3 or 4 days ago.
So, your grandma, we found her, but she's dead.
Where at?
Well, we believe that it's suspicious. Okay, we think someone killed her.
When?
And I'm really sorry.
Okay.
The daughter-in-law claimed she thought Marilyn had gone to run errands. The third woman shrugged, offering no information at all. None of them appeared alarmed. None of them had reported her missing. And when they spoke, something was missing. The lack of concern set off alarms for investigators. Their stories didn't match. Their timelines had gaps, and none of them seemed interested in who had murdered the woman who had housed and fed them for months. Detectives pulled phone records. Marilyn's phone had gone dark the evening of January 25th, hours before her body was found. Her grandson's phone, on the other hand, was active. So were the others. Cell tower data placed all three individuals in the vicinity of Rio Rancho late that night. The triangulation lined up almost exactly with the burn site. They hadn't reported her missing because they already knew where she was. Investigators secured search warrants for Marilyn's home and the vehicle registered to the grandson.
Okay, we actually have to secure the house.
Okay, I'm just trying to get all my stuff out.
Okay.
Like,
All right, so unfortunately, I can't let you go back inside.
I have things in there.
Unfortunately, I can't.
So she says.
This is the Albuquerque Police Department. Make your presence known. Make your presence known now.
Inside the house, there were subtle signs of a rushed cleanup. The kitchen smelled faintly of bleach. Trash had been taken out. Bedding had been changed. Yet there was a strange tension in the air, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The real discovery came inside the vehicle. Forensics revealed traces of gasoline on the seats. A single strand of Marilyn's hair was recovered from the trunk. And under the floor mat, partially melted into the lining, was a button from what was later confirmed to be one of Marilyn's work uniforms. That was all investigators needed to bring the suspects in for formal questioning.
Your story doesn't match. That's
Try to make sure they're not
that's
too
what's
bad,
going on. This officer's going to transport you there. You're going to meet with another detective, and we're going to sit down and have a chat, okay?
One by one, they were interviewed. One by one, they broke. The third woman cracked first. Under pressure, she admitted they had gotten rid of Marilyn.
We all were in Alyssa's room getting high. That's pretty much when Alyssa, she had brought it up before about killing Marilyn. I still didn't think we were gonna do it. I thought she was joking. Drake was like, "Can you just let us stay? Look at my mom packing." She was like, "No." Alyssa looked at me and Drake and nodded, and I looked at Drake, and he started walking behind Marilyn, and I got Marilyn and from behind and took her down.
She claimed it wasn't supposed to go that far. She said it started with an argument over rent and escalated, but her version of events quickly unraveled. The grandson followed, eventually confessing that the murder had been planned.
I'm gonna tell you the honesty. My grandmother said, "I'm too old. Will you please kill me?" Multiple times, drunk and sober.
Okay.
That is honestly.
He was tired of being told what to do, tired of being treated like a child. When Marilyn finally stood her ground and demanded they leave her house, they decided, together, to make sure she'd never speak again. They lured her into a vulnerable situation, overpowered her, killed her. Then they wrapped her body, placed it in the trunk, and drove her into the desert. They doused her with gasoline, they lit the fire, and they left her there, believing that the flames would cover their tracks. But what they didn't know is that fire can destroy the body, but not the truth. With the confessions, the forensic evidence, the cell records, and the text messages pointing to motive and intent, the case was sealed. The people Marilyn had once called family, the ones she cooked for, paid for, sheltered, had not only betrayed her, they had extinguished her life. But justice was just beginning to ignite. By the time the case reached court, the public already knew the broad strokes. The story had circulated through Albuquerque like wildfire. How a beloved mail carrier vanished, how her body was found burned in the desert, and how her own family members were charged with the crime. But the full weight of the tragedy didn't settle in until the trial began. People wanted answers. They wanted justice. And most of all, they wanted to understand how something so monstrous could come from within a home built on kindness. The courtroom was packed as the trial opened. On one side sat Marilyn Gondert's surviving friends and distant relatives, grieving, quiet, holding photographs and tissues. On the other side sat the accused, her grandson, her daughter-in-law, and their female accomplice, each flanked by attorneys. No one wore tears. No one showed regret. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the facts. They painted a devastating timeline, one that began with a grandmother offering her home to a family in need, and ended with that same family conspiring to end her life. They showed the jury text messages recovered from deleted threads, conversations filled with anger, resentment, and ominous intent. In one message, the daughter-in-law referred to Marilyn as a burden and a manipulative old woman. The grandson wrote, "She thinks she can control us. Not anymore." The prosecution brought forward investigators who testified about the cell tower data, placing all three suspects near the Rio Rancho burn site. Crime scene experts explained the gasoline residues found in the vehicle and the remains of Marilyn's postal uniform discovered inside the trunk. Forensic analysts broke down how accelerants had been strategically used to try and destroy the body. Clear evidence that this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment act, but a carefully orchestrated crime. Then came the confessions. Clips from police interrogations were played. The jury heard the accomplice describe how they had planned the murder, how Marilyn was lured, overpowered, and killed. Her words were cold, robotic, like she was describing a scene from a film, not the real execution of a human being. The grandson's confession was even more disturbing. He spoke of control, of feeling disrespected by his grandmother, of wanting to teach her a lesson. When asked if he felt remorse, he paused and said, "It had to be done." The defense tried to claim that the grandson had been manipulated by the others, that he was young, that he didn't fully understand the consequences. They tried to paint the daughter-in-law as emotionally unstable, under immense stress, not capable of forming intent. They claimed the accomplice was acting on her own rage, pulling the others down with her. But none of it held up, not against the evidence, not against the recorded words that laid out exactly what they had planned and executed. The trial lasted 2 weeks, but the deliberation took less than 2 days. The jury returned with guilty verdicts across the board. Marilyn's grandson was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison, the maximum allowed under his plea agreement. The daughter-in-law received a similar sentence after being convicted of conspiracy and second-degree murder. The accomplice, who had cooperated slightly earlier in the investigation, received a reduced but still substantial sentence for her role. None of them apologized during sentencing. They sat motionless as the judge read their punishments, offering no final words, no closure, no recognition of the life they had taken. For those who loved Marilyn, justice had been served, but it did not come with peace. How could it? What comfort could be found in knowing that the people she trusted the most were the very ones who plotted her death? The prosecutor closed the trial with a statement that echoed across the courtroom. This wasn't just a murder, it was a betrayal of the deepest kind. Marilyn gave everything to these people, and when she asked for respect, they gave her fire. And with that, the case of Marilyn Gandert, a grandmother, a mail carrier, and a woman of quiet strength, came to its legal conclusion. But for those who sat in that courtroom and heard every word, the story would never truly be over. The courtroom had gone quiet, the verdicts were in, the killers had been sentenced. But outside the walls of the courthouse, the pain was only beginning to set in. Because for those who knew and loved Marilyn Gander, there was no real closure, only the grim finality of knowing she was gone, and that her end had come not at the hands of some stranger, but from within her own home. In the weeks following the trial, her North Valley neighborhood carried the weight of the loss like a heavy fog. Marilyn's absence was felt on every porch, every mailbox, every quiet morning that should have included her soft footsteps and familiar smile. Residents began leaving flowers in their mailboxes. Some posted handwritten notes on their doors. "We miss you, Marilyn." Others placed tiny American flags along her old route, honoring her years of service in a way no ceremony could match. Her co-workers at the United States Postal Service held a private vigil. They remembered her as dependable, kind, and full of quiet pride in her work.
Somebody who dedicated themselves to their customers and was always there to provide great customer service.
Stories were shared of how she used to carry treats for dogs along her route, how she would check in on elderly residents, and how she never once complained about the job.
Saw the good in people and good in a lot of things, no matter what she went through.
Even in the worst weather. One colleague simply said, "She showed up. Always." But underneath the grief lay something harder to face, the betrayal. Marilyn had opened her home to the very people who would destroy her. Her kindness had been mistaken for weakness. And when she finally drew a boundary, when she said, "Enough," it cost her her life. Her story sparked difficult conversations across the community about elder abuse, about family entitlement, about what happens when the ones we trust most mistake love for ownership. Social workers and advocacy groups began using her case in training sessions. Her murder became a case study used to illustrate how dependency, manipulation, and untreated resentment can spiral into something horrifying. People began looking differently at the quiet, older women in their lives, the caretakers, the matriarchs, the peacemakers. Marilyn's name became a reminder that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it lives in those who simply keep showing up, day after day without complaint. Her extended family, devastated and humiliated by the crime, struggled to make sense of the tragedy. While some distanced themselves from the events altogether, others vowed to never let Marilyn be forgotten. Her niece wrote in a local op-ed, "She deserved to be honored, not erased. We will speak her name every chance we get." And people did. Marilyn's name was added to local memorials honoring victims of violent crime. Her photo, a modest headshot with her USPS uniform and warm, knowing eyes, was printed on flyers distributed by domestic violence awareness campaigns. Her face, once so familiar to the people along her route, now became a symbol of a much bigger story. True crime shows and podcasts began to pick up her case. The dramatized reenactments were painful to watch for those who knew her, but they served a purpose: to ensure no one forgot the horror of what had happened, and the importance of recognizing danger even when it comes wearing a familiar face. But perhaps the deepest impact was internal. Marilyn Gander didn't live a glamorous life. She didn't seek attention, fame, or recognition. She wasn't loud or confrontational. She wasn't known for making waves, but she mattered to her community, to her friends, and to the people she served every day with quiet dignity. And when her life was taken, when she was robbed of the peace she had earned, her story did something she never would have asked for. It demanded to be heard. In the end, Marilyn's story isn't just about murder. It's about trust. It's about the cruel intersection of love and exploitation. And most heartbreakingly, it's about how evil doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it's sitting at the kitchen table. Sometimes it sleeps in the next room. The people who killed Marilyn didn't wear masks or carry weapons in the dark. They were people she cooked for, laughed with, paid bills for. They knew her routines, her weaknesses, her compassion. And when they decided to destroy her, they used that knowledge to their advantage. It's not the brutality of the crime that haunts the most. It's the betrayal. Marilyn gave everything she could to those around her. And in the end, when she finally stood up for herself, when she finally said no, they silenced her. Not in an act of desperation, but in a plan born of entitlement, resentment, and unthinkable cruelty. And yet, despite everything they did to erase her, they failed. They tried to burn her body. They tried to bury the truth. But what they didn't count on was the ripple effect her story would cause. They didn't expect a community to rally around her memory. They didn't expect the media attention, the investigations, the outrage. They didn't expect Marilyn Gander to become a symbol of strength, of kindness, and of the need to protect those who live their lives serving others without complaint. Because while they tried to extinguish her, the truth lit a fire they couldn't control. That fire spread from newsrooms to courtrooms, from vigils to TV screens. It ignited conversations about elder abuse, about hidden violence within families, and about the dangers of silence. People began asking harder questions. Who are we overlooking? Who are we failing to protect? Who is quietly suffering, assuming no one will believe them if they speak? Marilyn's legacy is not just one of tragedy, it's one of transformation. She was never someone who sought the spotlight, but in death, her story forced people to open their eyes. Her name now lives in more than case files. It lives in legislation discussions, in training sessions for law enforcement, in domestic violence awareness campaigns, and in every mailbox she once touched, there's a piece of her still present, a whisper of compassion, of strength wrapped in routine. Even the sentencing of her killers, while legally satisfying, could never fully answer the question that echoes at the center of her story. How could they? How could a grandson, someone raised under her roof, fed at her table, see her as disposable? How could a daughter-in-law, the very person Marilyn had tried to help through hardship, repay that kindness with fire? We may never get a satisfying answer, because sometimes evil doesn't make sense. Sometimes it doesn't wear horns or announce itself. Sometimes it smiles back at you. So what can we take from this? Perhaps it's the courage to check in on those we think are fine. Perhaps it's a renewed respect for the quiet people in our lives, the givers, the helpers, the steady hands who carry so much without ever asking for anything in return. Perhaps it's the strength to set boundaries and the wisdom to recognize when love is being weaponized. And most importantly, perhaps it's the call to never overlook those who seem the strongest simply because they never complain. Marilyn Gander was more than a murder victim. She was a woman of integrity, grace, and unshakable generosity. And while her story ended in violence, it refuses to fade. It stands now as a warning and a reminder that kindness must be protected, that silence must be questioned, and that even in the darkest desert, truth will rise from the ashes. So to Marilyn, we remember you. We speak your name, and we promise your fire will not be forgotten.
Cabrera did not have custodial rights to Vanity, and according to family, the child was being taken care of by other family members.
She has zero custody. I have all the paperwork. We literally just had the cops come today because she was in my house trying to, she was here at my house trying to take her, and we said no, and she took her anyways.
Police say they got a call about a kidnapping, and the driver of this SUV, 32-year-old Pamela Cabrera, is a suspect.
Police say she kidnapped her daughter while armed, led officers on a chase, and crashed into this retention pond.
I hope that kid's
dead. Kid's dead.
March 31st, 2022, Jacksonville, Florida. A peaceful spring evening descended into unimaginable horror. On this day, 5-year-old Vanity Cabrera's life was cut short in a way no child deserves. The sun was setting over the busy interchanges of a 95 and 9B when sirens ripped through the air. Police cars tore down the highways at over 90 miles per hour, chasing a silver vehicle. But inside that speeding car was not a dangerous fugitive on the run. It was a frightened little girl and her own mother behind the wheel. As officers pursued, unaware of what would unfold in mere minutes, drivers along the route watched in stunned confusion as the chase weaved through traffic lights and exits. What began as a routine kidnapping report would soon become one of Jacksonville's most haunting tragedies. Today, we unravel the heartbreaking story of Vanity Cabrera, a child who spent her last moments trapped in a sinking car, while the mother who should have protected her chose a path of irreversible destruction. What drove Pamela Cabrera to flee with her daughter at knife point? Could anyone have stopped this? And what happened in the dark waters of that retention pond as officers dove in, desperately trying to save a life already slipping away? This is not just a story of a police pursuit gone wrong. It is a story of mental illness, a failed system, and the unimaginable cost when society's safety nets break. Stay with us as we investigate every chilling detail. Pamela Cabrera's life had long been dominated by mental illness. Diagnosed with chronic severe bipolar disorder, with psychotic features and schizoaffective disorder, she was no stranger to psychiatric institutions or medication regimens. Family and court records paint the portrait of a woman trapped in cycles of treatment, breakdown, and recovery. Her daughter Vanity was only 5. Bright-eyed with long curls framing her delicate face, she lived with relatives due to her mother's instability. Court orders had denied Pamela legal custody, fearing exactly what would come to pass. To Vanity, Pamela was a distant, sometimes frightening presence. To Pamela, Vanity was her world, but that love was clouded by delusion and paranoia. On March 31st, everything unraveled. According to reports, Pamela armed herself with a knife and abducted Vanity, driving off despite knowing she was not permitted to take her. A 911 call from Whitney Baez alerted police that Vanity had been kidnapped by her mother with a weapon.
Jackson 911 was the location of your emergency. Hi, I would like to report a kidnapping. Where you at? I am in Jacksonville, Florida. Okay, are you the one that was kidnapped? Who was kidnapped? She came and took her, and she just sped off in the car with her. She has no custody at all. She has zero custody. I have all the paperwork. We literally just had the cops come today because she was in my house trying to she was here at my house trying to take her, and we said no, and she took her anyways. Do you know what kind of vehicle she was in? Yes, she's in a gold Nissan Murano. I have the license plate number. How long ago did they leave? She just left. She just sped off right now.
All right. And is she supposed to be around?
No, she's not supposed to have, she's allowed to have visitation, but only supervised. So I was standing right there with her, my newborn, and she sped off.
Officers were dispatched immediately. Pamela's erratic behavior had been escalating. Earlier that day, she called police herself, insisting she had visitation rights.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
I don't know the exact address. I think it's, let me see. Hold on. And the thing is that I need a cop to come. I think it's called. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna get to the street name right now. Okay, so I have visitation rights to the court.
Mm-hmm.
And she's in my sister's house. So I can't see her from my sister's home. She don't want me in her house. So I said, I'm going to call the cops and take her so I can see my daughter.
Any taking drugs or weapons?
No.
What's your last name? A good callback number for you?
This one.
What is this one? Okay, are you there at the
Yeah, I'm right in front of the house. Still not out of school yet. She gets out of school. They haven't even went to go pick her up yet. But I'm here because they're gonna go pick her up now.
Okay.
And I just need the cops to be here so they can solve the. Because she don't want me to be here, but I came because I got the visitation right.
Okay, I'll have officer out there to you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
You're welcome.
But these calls were dismissed as delusional. The stage was set for tragedy long before the chase even began. It was around dusk when officers spotted Pamela's car at the intersection of Biscayne Boulevard and Dunn Avenue. Sirens blared, lights flashed, but instead of pulling over, she slammed her foot on the gas. The silver vehicle tore down highways at speeds reaching 90 miles per hour. Red lights were ignored, and other drivers barely swerved in time. For nearly 30 miles, the pursuit continued, winding through Jacksonville's major roads as officers radioed in her movements. In those fleeting moments, Vanity sat quietly in the front seat, unaware of the looming danger. Dash cams recorded every desperate turn. When Pamela approached the interchange for 9B West, she tried to exit, but in her panic, she missed the curve. Her car shot forward, crossed a grassy slope, and plunged directly into the dark waters of a retention pond. Police cars screeched to a halt on the roadside. Officers sprinted towards the pond as the car bobbed once, then began sinking. Pamela scrambled out through a window and clung to a floating tire.
Ready?
But Vanity remained trapped inside as water rushed into the car. Body cam footage captures the frantic attempts of officers to reach her. Shouts fill the air. One officer stripped his vest and dove repeatedly, struggling to open doors already locked by the pressure. Within minutes, the car vanished beneath the murky surface. As the sun set behind the tree line near Y95, the flashing lights of patrol cars illuminated the darkening pond where Vanity Cabrera's life ended. 5-year-old Vanity lay strapped in her seat, silent and still.
I hope that kid's
dead. The kid's dead. Like an 8-year-old little child. That's why I wasn't going to let go. That's why I wasn't giving up.
For the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, the investigation into Vanity's death began right there, knee-deep in mud and grief. Detectives cordoned off the area with yellow tape as officers stood by, silent and shaken by what they had just witnessed. Body cam footage captured the anguished voices of those who dove again and again, praying they would find the child alive.
Yeah, we just got her out.
Okay, is there a kid in there? All right, there's a kid in the car.
It's a small kid. Small kid in the car.
But prayers weren't enough that day. In the hours following, a flood of questions arose. Why was Pamela Cabrera driving with Vanity if she did not have custody? How did she manage to abduct her daughter with a knife, evade immediate apprehension, and then lead officers on a 30-mile chase ending in death? Detectives interviewed the officers involved, collecting dash cam and body cam footage frame by frame. The video evidence showed Pamela's silver car speeding through intersections, narrowly avoiding collisions, and weaving across lanes in sheer desperation. The investigation expanded into Pamela's mental health records. Court filings and medical documents revealed a long history of psychiatric illness. She had been diagnosed with chronic severe bipolar disorder with psychotic features, as well as schizoaffective disorder. Over the years, she had been in and out of psychiatric care, prescribed strong medications, and flagged multiple times as unstable. Her family and medical providers knew she was a danger to herself and potentially to others when untreated. Detectives consulted with the Department of Children and Families to understand why Vanity was allowed any contact with her mother, despite these warnings. It became clear that Vanity had been living with family members for her safety. Yet somehow, on March 31st, Pamela accessed her daughter without intervention from authorities or care agencies. Forensic teams examined the vehicle after it was towed from the pond. Water damage destroyed much of the interior, but seatbelt locks and child restraints were intact. Toxicology tests showed no alcohol or illicit substances in Pamela's system, further supporting her attorney's argument that untreated mental illness alone drove her behavior.
In 2020, they gave me Vanity. I had it for a whole month because they took Vanity away from her because she was having mental health problems.
It's incredibly sad that not just because it was a young girl that passed, but that the mother was having mental health issues and probably could have used some help.
A mother abducting her child with a knife, speeding from police, and ending her daughter's life in a watery grave was a narrative too shocking to process. For the officers involved, counseling was offered. Many described nightmares of that evening, seeing Vanity's small figure submerged beneath dark water, knowing their best efforts could not save her. The investigation concluded with clear charges: aggravated manslaughter of a child, and aggravated fleeing or attempting to elude police causing death. Prosecutors argued that Pamela's decision to run, drive recklessly, and miss the exit directly caused Vanity's death, regardless of her mental state. But for Vanity's family, the criminal investigation was only the first step. They filed a civil lawsuit against multiple agencies, including Lifestream Behavioral Center, Eckerd Youth Alternatives, the LJD Jewish Family and Community Services, and Family Support Services, alleging that their collective negligence placed Vanity in harm's way. The lawsuit argued these agencies failed to enforce custody restrictions, failed to treat Pamela adequately, and failed to protect a vulnerable child from a mother known to be severely mentally ill and off her medication. Investigators wrapped their case with a chilling conclusion. Vanity's death was not just the result of a mother's crime. It was the final chapter in a story of systemic failure, untreated mental illness, and a child lost forever to preventable tragedy. The criminal trial of Pamela Cabrera began with a heavy atmosphere inside the Duval County Courthouse. In it sat a woman with uncombed hair, hollow cheeks, and eyes glazed with medication. This was not the frenzied mother who sped away with her daughter. This was Pamela Cabrera, stripped of delusion, medicated, and subdued. Initially, Pamela was found incompetent to stand trial. Psychiatric evaluations determined she was unable to comprehend the proceedings or assist her attorneys due to her severe psychotic symptoms. For months, she remained at a state hospital, undergoing stabilization treatments, until doctors ruled she was fit for court. Her attorneys prepared an insanity defense. They argued that her bipolar disorder with psychotic features and schizoaffective disorder rendered her incapable of understanding the consequences of her actions on March 31st.
All right, very well. Based on my review of the report, Dr. Meadows' report, applying applicable legal standards after an independent review, this court finds that Ms. Cabrera is incompetent to proceed, meets the criteria for involuntary hospitalization, and there is a reasonable probability that Ms. Cabrera will regain competency within a reasonable period of time.
I think it really does underscore the nature of the mental illness that Pamela Cabrera suffered from and still suffers from. You can see by her behavior in court that she's acting irrationally.
In her mind, they argued, she was not fleeing police to harm Vanity. She believed she was protecting her from imagined threats. During pretrial hearings, Vanity's family sat in silence. At times, sobs broke out as prosecutors described the frantic rescue efforts at the pond. Body cam footage was played in court. Officers diving repeatedly into black water, muffled shouts echoing from their vests. Some jurors wept openly, but in January 2024, Pamela Cabrera unexpectedly pleaded guilty to 2 charges: aggravated manslaughter of a child and aggravated felony fleeing or attempting to elude causing death.
Your plea to the court was to counts 1 and 3 with a range between 10 and 30 years. After hearing the presentation from both sides and taking into consideration aggravation and mitigation that's provided, regardless of the guidelines, based on the serious nature of the offense, as to count 1 and count 3, based on the plea, the maximum being allowed is 30 years. The court sees fit that based on the aggravation involved to sentence you to the maximum allowed. and be adjudicated guilty on counts 1 and 3, be sentenced to 30 years.
It was a decision that stunned observers. Her attorneys explained that a plea deal ensured Pamela avoided a potential life sentence while sparing Vanity's family from prolonged testimony. The plea acknowledged her guilt while still allowing her team to cite mental illness in sentencing considerations. The sentencing hearing in October 2024 was emotionally charged. Pamela sat slouched, staring at the table before her. The prosecution described the timeline of Vanity's death with harrowing clarity. She drove at over 90 miles per hour, ran red lights, and missed an exit. She escaped the sinking car, leaving her child trapped. That is not illness alone. That is reckless disregard for human life.
Cabrera's sister, Whitney Baez, testified that she had custody of Cabrera's 5-year-old daughter, Vanity, because of Cabrera's mental health issues and erratic behavior. But prosecutors argued Cabrera knew exactly what she was doing, despite her mental health issues.
The defendant's actions in this case killed her own child, endangered people on the roadways, endangered the lives of officers who were attempting to rescue her and the child.
Her defense team countered, detailing psychiatric hospitalizations, medication failures, and how her untreated illness distorted reality. They pleaded for leniency, suggesting a reduced prison term with mandatory psychiatric care. She is a very sick woman, her attorney said, voice cracking. She did not intend for this outcome. Her mind was broken. Family members of Vanity spoke before the court. Her aunt sobbed uncontrollably, stating, "Every night I close my eyes, I see her there. She was only 5. She loved to dance. She loved her mom. She trusted her mom." When the judge delivered the sentence, 30 years in prison, Pamela showed little reaction. Courtroom footage showed her later being removed by deputies after an outburst, shouting incoherent phrases about Vanity still being alive.
A Jacksonville mom expected to be sentenced today for the death of her 5-year-old daughter is kicked out of the courtroom for being so disruptive.
I wrote this letter for you.
I know, you'll give it a chance. It's okay. We'll take your time. It's not a problem.
Can I give it to you?
Not right now. You can give it to you can give it to your attorney in the back.
I was gonna say something and you made me forget what I was gonna say.
Her eyes darted around, filled with confusion and fear. For a moment, it was clear the illness remained, gnawing at what little clarity she had left. The sentence closed the criminal chapter of Vanity Cabrera's death, but left a lingering question in the air. Was justice truly served? For some, Pamela's imprisonment felt hollow. For others, it was the only accountability available in a case where mental illness collided fatally with a system unable to protect the most vulnerable. In the weeks following the sentencing, Jacksonville's grief shifted from shock to anger. Candlelight vigils were held near the pond where Vanity drowned. Pink and white balloons floated into the evening sky as community members gathered to mourn the little girl they never knew, but whose story tore at their hearts. News segments highlighted not just Vanity's death, but the systems that failed to protect her. Local anchors questioned how a woman with documented psychosis and a history of institutionalization was able to abduct her daughter at knife point. For the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, the trauma lingered. Officers involved in the pursuit and rescue were placed on mandatory counseling. In interviews, one diver described nightmares of reaching Vanity only to find her unresponsive, trapped by her seatbelt as the car filled with water. "We train for rescues like that," he said, voice breaking, "but nothing prepares you to pull out a child." Pamela Cabrera was transferred to the Florida Women's Reception Center to begin her 30-year sentence. Correctional officers reported she often muttered to herself about Vanity being alive, hallucinating conversations with her daughter. Psychiatrists continued treatment, but her condition remained severe. Attorneys for the family stated, this was not an isolated failure. This was a systemic failure from top to bottom. Vanity was failed by everyone who should have protected her. The lawsuit seeks damages for wrongful death and aims to force policy changes within Florida's child protection and mental health systems. The case is ongoing, with hearings set for later this year. In the community, Vanity's death sparked discussions about mental health reform. Advocacy groups highlighted the lack of crisis intervention programs for parents with severe psychotic illnesses. But amidst these broader movements was a simpler, more intimate grief. At Vanity's funeral, her small white casket was adorned with pink roses and stuffed animals. Family members placed handwritten letters inside, promising never to forget her. Her father, silent through most of the service, finally spoke. She was my baby. She deserved to grow up. She deserved a life. For Pamela Cabrera, her prison term may last until old age, but the mental prison of guilt, hallucination, and grief is something she will carry forever. Whether justice was served remains debated, but for Vanity, justice can never reverse the dark waters that stole her life. The story of Vanity Cabrera forces us to confront a painful truth. Sometimes evil is not born from hatred or malice, but from untreated sickness and systemic neglect. Vanity's death was not the act of a calculating killer hiding in the shadows. It was the final tragedy in a life shaped by chaos, fear, and failure at every level. Pamela Cabrera loved her daughter. Those who knew her insist that before illness consumed her mind, she was gentle, affectionate, and proud of Vanity. But mental illness does not care about love. Untreated, it becomes its own dark force, whispering delusions that twist reality into paranoia and desperation. As we close this case, remember Vanity not for how she died, but for who she was. A 5-year-old girl who loved pink dresses and storybooks, who danced barefoot in the living room, who trusted that her mother would keep her safe. Her death should never have happened. And yet there are others like her, trapped in silent suffering as the world looks away. If this story leaves you with anger, let it. If it leaves you with grief, let it. But above all, let it remind you that society is judged not by how it treats the powerful, but how it protects the powerless. Tonight, as darkness falls over Jacksonville, the pond where Vanity died sits still and silent. But her story ripples outward, a reminder that mental illness left untreated becomes not just an individual tragedy, but a societal failure with fatal consequences. Thank you for staying with us through this heartbreaking journey. If you believe stories like Vanity's need to be heard to create change, please like this video, share it with those who care about child safety and mental health reform, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime documentaries that reveal the hidden tragedies of our time. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, justice is only real when it protects the innocent before it's too late.
Just for your safety, this guy has been known to have explosives in his residence. The guy was weird. He was really weird.
Yeah.
Not surprised.
Hey, Daniel. Oh, it is?
Fatal.
Don't put it on the air yet. It'll just make media.
Yeah.
One or two.
Very clean. One is getting transported, and one fatality.
What about the status of the other one? What's the status of the other one? Do they know? Probably stable?
Yeah, probably. Homicide, I don't know, we should probably let him know.
That's her.
Yeah.
This key is found in the laundry room. Wow, I was so close to getting him. Oh man, I was so close. They could have picked him up and taken him out. I was so close. Well, may not have been anything you could have done. Oh wow, I mean, that was just awful. So close, I almost rescued him. I almost rescued him.
My son was found dead. He was burnt from head to foot. He was literally cooked, nay, barbecued. She was repeating over and over, like almost in a sleep. She was repeating, I want back my son. She was saying, I want back my son. And I told her, you know that's not going to happen. Daniel Beckwith murdered my son.
It started with smoke, not from a campfire, not from a stove, but from deep beneath the earth. Inside a wealthy Maryland suburb, nestled behind manicured lawns and brick facades, a horrifying secret was burning to the surface. Firefighters responded to what seemed like an ordinary house fire in Bethesda on September 10, 2017. But nothing about this scene was ordinary. The house, owned by Daniel Beckwith, a millionaire stock trader and computer hacker, was unlike anything they had ever seen. Hoarding conditions made it nearly impossible to move inside. Trash and debris choked the hallways. And in the basement, something even more surreal. A crude entrance to a hidden tunnel system snaking under the property, like veins in the ground. At the far end of it lay the naked, burned body of a young man, just steps from safety, yet utterly unreachable. His name was Askia Kafra, just 21 years old, intelligent, driven, a dreamer with a plan to change the world through business. But instead, he died in the darkness, trapped underground, with no clear way out. His final texts were desperate cries for help. He smelled smoke. Something was wrong, but by the time emergency crews arrived, it was too late. Askia had been consumed by the fire and the madness that sparked it. At first glance, this case looked like a freak accident, a fire caused by faulty wiring, an unfortunate death in a cluttered home. But as investigators dug deeper, quite literally, they discovered a disturbing web of obsession, deception, and paranoia.
Yeah, let's go where this whole thing first started. I don't even know where the laptop. Maybe it's under. It was on the bed right here. Hey Daniel. One of the investigators collected a laptop. I don't know whether it's yours or Askia's or what. I don't like them. Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is way messier than it was before. Even, I mean, it wasn't in good shape before, but
So he was probably already over here, you think, the second time? This is the worst spot he could have gone to.
One where a brilliant but erratic man convinced another to bury himself alive in the name of survival. What was Daniel Beckwith hiding? Why had he lured a young entrepreneur into a labyrinth of tunnels beneath his house? And how had a fire so deadly and devastating been allowed to happen in the first place? This isn't just the story of a bizarre bunker project gone wrong. It's a tale of exploitation masked as opportunity, of trust traded for control, and of a justice system grappling with the question, when does eccentricity cross the line into criminal negligence? Askia's family called it murder.
My name is Dia Kafra. I am father of Askia Kafra. Daniel Beckwith murdered my son.
Beckwith's lawyers claimed it was a tragic accident. The courts? Well, even they couldn't quite agree. In a world increasingly obsessed with doomsday prepping, tech disruption, and the collapse of modern society, this case was a chilling collision of all three. A millionaire with a fear of nuclear war, a startup hopeful looking for his big break, and a house hiding secrets not even its neighbors could have imagined. This is the story of Askia Kafra, the tunnels he helped build, and the flames that revealed the truth. Stay with us. Askia Kafra was 21 years old, bright-eyed, ambitious, and idealistic. The kind of young man who believed in building something bigger than himself, literally. He was working on a startup idea he hoped would one day bring him success and purpose. He was sharp, creative, and driven. But like many young entrepreneurs, he lacked the one thing his vision couldn't manifest overnight: money. Daniel Beckwith. Beckwith was no stranger to wealth. A tech-savvy stock trader with a penchant for hacking, he'd made his fortune online. He lived in Bethesda, Maryland, in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. On the surface, he was reclusive, but seemingly harmless. But beneath that surface, quite literally, Beckwith was digging his own escape from the world. He feared a nuclear disaster, particularly from North Korea, and was obsessed with survival. So he began constructing an underground bunker system beneath his home. a paranoid labyrinth carved into the earth under layers of concrete and secrecy. Askia and Beckwith met online, where their worlds briefly aligned. Askia pitched his startup. Beckwith invested $5,000. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The business ultimately failed, but Beckwith saw something else in Askia, something he needed: labor, trust, discretion. Beckwith offered him another deal: help him dig, come work on his secret project. He'd be paid, and with Askia eager to restart his ambitions, he agreed. But Beckwith's world was different, dangerous. Once Askia accepted the job, the line between opportunity and captivity blurred. Beckwith insisted on total secrecy. When picking up Askia for work, he'd blindfold him with blackout glasses. He'd drive in long, disorienting loops to hide the home's true location.
Just hand him some glasses and he put them on.
What do you mean glasses?
They were just like blacked out glasses.
Like sunglasses, or they completely cover your eyes?
Completely covering.
So he couldn't see anything?
No. He was cool with it. I mean, I told him before he ever came, I was like, this is one of the conditions.
What did you tell me what you said to
Oh,
him?
I just said, I'm concerned about people knowing exactly where this is at.
Online, Beckwith spoofed the internet IP to make it seem like Askia was working in Virginia, not Maryland. Even Askia's own family didn't know the full extent of where he was or what he was doing. And inside that house, conditions were horrific. Askia lived in the tunnels for days at a time, eating, sleeping, and using a bucket as a toilet. There was an air circulation system and some lighting, but nothing met safety standards. Exposed electrical wiring hung like veins across the ceilings. The risk of fire was ever present. Upstairs was no better. The home was filled floor to ceiling with hoarded items, trash, electronics, and debris.
So if we have to do any more work in here, we'll make sure we don't do anything bad.
Alrighty.
Emergency exits were choked with clutter. A house built to hide from the outside world had also become a prison. Yet through all this, Askia stayed. Whether driven by desperation, hope, or Beckwith's manipulation, it's hard to say. What is clear is that he was isolated, overworked, and ultimately left in harm's way. Daniel Beckwith, for all his brilliance, was obsessed. Obsessed with survival, obsessed with secrecy. But what he lacked, tragically, was responsibility. Askia may have believed he was helping build a future, one of security, one with a financial reward, perhaps even the beginning of his entrepreneurial dreams. But what he was really building was a death trap. And when the flames came, they exposed far more than faulty wiring. They revealed the consequences of blind trust, unchecked obsession, and what happens when ambition turns into exploitation. On the night of September 10, 2017, a fire broke out at 5211 Danbury Road in Bethesda, Maryland. But it wasn't just a house that went up in flames. It was a secret. That evening, the quiet neighborhood was disrupted by rising smoke and the sudden arrival of emergency responders. Flames had erupted from the basement of Daniel Beckwith's home, a bizarre, cluttered, fortress-like structure filled with mounds of junk, electronics, and trash. Inside was a man, Askia Kafra. He didn't survive, but long before the fire ignited, the danger was already smoldering. Askia had been staying underground for days as part of his work helping Beckwith construct a private network of tunnels beneath the house. This wasn't just a side project, it was an obsession. Beckwith believed nuclear war was imminent, particularly from North Korea, and he was determined to survive. His plan, a hidden bunker system built entirely in secret. He didn't hire contractors, he didn't apply for permits. Instead, he recruited Askia, a young man looking for another shot at making his dream work. In exchange for cash, Beckwith demanded silence and full cooperation. That meant letting go of logic, letting go of control, letting go of safety. Askia followed the rules, even when they didn't make sense. He wore black glasses during pickups and endured Beckwith's long, confusing drives meant to disorient him. Beckwith even manipulated internet traffic to make it seem like Askia was working from Virginia, not Maryland. It was a psychological maze built alongside the physical one. Down in the tunnels, Askia worked by hand for hours, even days, carving out space in the dirt. There was ventilation, light, and basic wiring, But everything was homemade, rigged by Beckwith himself. Nothing about it was inspected or secure. Exposed wires ran through plywood and trash. The air was stale. The tunnel was narrow, and the surface above, the house itself, was an obstacle course of hoarded chaos. Still, Askia stayed. That night, he sent Beckwith a message from inside the tunnel. He smelled smoke. But instead of calling 911 or rushing to help, Beckwith tried to address the problem remotely. He later claimed he activated a fan. Minutes ticked by. Smoke thickened. Then the fire surged. Investigators later determined the blaze was caused by a defective electrical outlet in the basement, likely overloaded by the tangled mass of cords and wires Beckwith had installed without oversight. As the fire grew, Askia had no chance. Trapped in the basement, disoriented by the smoke, and overwhelmed by the hoarding conditions, Askia tried to escape. He made it within feet of the basement door, but piles of debris, trash, and obstacles blocked his way. The flames moved faster than he could. The thick smoke consumed the oxygen. Firefighters found his body, naked, charred, and curled up on the floor. He was just steps from safety. A few clear feet might have saved him. But in Beckwith's house, even escape was buried under paranoia. The image haunted everyone who saw it. Askia hadn't been killed by malice. He wasn't stabbed, shot, or intentionally murdered. He died because someone who should have known better, failed to act like a responsible human being, failed to provide safety, failed to call for help in time. The tragedy wasn't just that a young man full of dreams died. It was that he died for something absurd, digging a bunker for a doomsday that never came, beneath the house of a man who thought he could outsmart the end of the world, but not his own negligence. The fire may have been the immediate cause of death, but what really killed Askia Khafra was a toxic combination of obsession, secrecy, and irresponsibility. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze at Daniel Beckwith's Bethesda home, they expected to find destruction. What they didn't expect was a descent into something almost surreal. Part hoarder's den, part bunker, part tomb. The discovery of Askia Khafra's body was only the beginning. The condition of the home raised immediate red flags. First responders struggled to even navigate the interior. Rooms were packed floor to ceiling with debris, trash, and electronic equipment. Getting to the basement had been a challenge. But what did they find underneath it? That's when everything changed. Behind scorched panels and beneath piles of junk, investigators found a small opening, the mouth of a tunnel. As they entered, what appeared at first to be an amateur crawl space revealed itself to be an entire subterranean network, hand-dug shafts stretching dozens of feet in multiple directions, makeshift ventilation systems, electric lights, plywood supports, and at the center of it all, a clear sign that someone had been living down there. Askia's belongings, a mattress, personal items, food packaging, were discovered in what amounted to an underground living cell. He had been eating and sleeping there, working there, surviving there, all under the radar of building inspectors, law enforcement, and even neighbors who had no idea what was happening, just feet beneath their homes. As fire marshals traced the source of the fire, they quickly found the ignition point, a basement electrical outlet overloaded with makeshift wiring. It had sparked and caught fire, a fire that had rapidly spread upward into the hoarded space, turning the home into a death trap. Forensic analysis confirmed that the outlet had been overloaded and not installed to code. There were no circuit breakers designed to contain such an overload, just a web of tangled extension cords strung like a spider's nest around combustible materials. But the most damning evidence came from the timeline. Askia had texted Beckwith from underground, saying he smelled smoke. This wasn't an instantaneous fire. There had been a window, a narrow, critical window where Beckwith could have acted. Instead of calling 911 or racing to save Askia, Beckwith stayed upstairs, claiming he tried to manage the situation with a ventilation fan. Minutes ticked by, and the fire grew. By the time Beckwith finally called for help, it was too late. The fire department later estimated that Askia likely died from smoke inhalation and thermal injuries just minutes before they arrived. The story soon caught the attention of Montgomery County detectives. They were stunned by the level of secrecy Beckwith had employed.
Just for your safety, this guy has been known
explosives in his residence. The guy was weird. He was really weird.
Interviews with Askia's family revealed that even they didn't know the precise location of where he had been working.
He used to blindfold my son with dark glasses and drive him for as much as 1-2 hours way out to Manassas in Virginia. So my son was under the belief that these tunnels were out in the mountains of Virginia. And then he would give him a key lanyard to hold, but lead him into his basement with Askia holding the key lanyard and blindfolded, and he holding the other end. Take him to the hole in the ground, the shaft that leads down to the tunnel, and it's only at that point the blindfold was removed. Unfortunately, it's almost like a dog on a leash.
One of the most chilling details, Beckwith had used a technique called IP spoofing to make it appear online that Askia was digging tunnels in Virginia, not Maryland. Investigators viewed this as more than just eccentricity. It was a deception. As the investigation unfolded, so did Beckwith's disturbing pattern of behavior.
Easy into it. I just need a second. I need a second. This
Neighbors described him as reclusive. Some had noticed strange activity, but had no idea of its scope.
There's been stories about that. They mentioned like a hoarding situation. Could be anything from someone survivalist in an underground bunker.
And you said the guy that lives here, what's his name? The guy who
His name is Daniel Beckwith. He actually had explosives apparently at his house.
This house or
his house?
And that was where?
In Champaign, Urbana,
Illinois.
I think they kept him in jail for a while, but he couldn't have done much time.
Online, Beckwith had a trail of writings, posts in hacker forums, survivalist discussions, and doomsday threads. He wasn't just paranoid. He was preparing for an apocalypse of his own design. Askia's family, devastated and confused, demanded justice. They believed their son had been exploited, lured into a situation that was wildly unsafe and intentionally hidden. Investigators agreed. What emerged wasn't a clear-cut case of intentional murder, but something just as insidious: a reckless disregard for human life. In April 2018, a grand jury indicted Daniel Beckwith on charges of second-degree depraved heart murder and involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that Beckwith's conduct, while not driven by intent to kill, showed such extreme negligence and disregard that it constituted murder under Maryland law. It was a rare charge, but given the bizarre circumstances and Beckwith's clear awareness of the dangers he had created, prosecutors felt it was justified. The tunnels weren't just illegal, they were lethal, and one man had died as a result. The trial would test the limits of how far the law could stretch to hold someone accountable, not for a violent act, but for letting madness spiral into manslaughter. In April 2019, the case of State of Maryland versus Daniel Beckwith made its way to the courtroom, and with it came a flood of public fascination and outrage. It wasn't just the crime that was on trial, it was the very definition of responsibility. Prosecutors framed Beckwith's actions as nothing short of depraved. They didn't argue that he intended to kill Askia Khafra. Instead, they claimed Beckwith acted with such reckless disregard for life that his behavior rose to the level of second-degree depraved heart murder. It was an unusual charge, one that didn't rely on motive or premeditation, but on behavior so grossly negligent it implied a hardened indifference to human life. The courtroom listened as prosecutors laid out the details: how Beckwith kept his home in hoarded chaos, how he forced Askia to live underground for days at a time, how he manipulated his sense of location using blindfolds and spoofed IP addresses, and most damning of all, how he failed to act when smoke first began to rise. Askia had texted Beckwith about smelling smoke. That was a moment of decision, and Beckwith, prosecutors argued, chose secrecy over saving a life. They brought in firefighters who described the horrors of the scene and experts who confirmed that the outlet in question had sparked due to faulty, overloaded wiring. Beckwith, they argued, knew about the hazards but ignored them. He had, in essence, built a tomb. The defense, meanwhile, painted a different picture, one of a socially isolated man, eccentric and paranoid, yes, but not malicious. They admitted Beckwith was obsessed with prepping and survival and that he had hoarding tendencies. But they argued he genuinely cared about Askia and had even invested in his business. The tunnel project was presented not as exploitation, but as a misguided partnership between two adults. The fire, they said, was a tragic accident, not a crime. The defense insisted Beckwith had no intention to harm Askia and had even paid him well for the work. They also claimed that Beckwith tried to help once he was alerted to the smoke, including turning on a fan and eventually calling 911. This, they argued, showed panic and concern, not indifference, but the jury wasn't convinced. The prosecution's portrait of Beckwith as a man who built a death trap, then refused to act when danger came, stuck with them. After deliberation, they delivered their verdict, guilty of second-degree depraved heart murder and involuntary manslaughter. It was a landmark decision. Convictions on depraved heart murder are rare, especially in cases without direct violence. Judge Margaret Schweitzer sentenced Beckwith to 9 years in prison, a sentence many found lenient yet legally appropriate under Maryland's guidelines.
Now, I want to let you know, second-degree depraved heart murder, the minimum sentence for that is 10 years. And I think the maximum was either 25 or 30 years. The judge at his sentencing gave him 9 years, one less than the minimum. I couldn't understand it. Here's her explanation. She don't believe that what happened rises to the level of a second-degree depraved heart murder. And because of that, this is the reason she gave him 9 years. And she praised him. She actually praised him. She said he's so bright, he's so intelligent, he has a lot to give to society. She said that he reminded her of her brother, who is a bright guy, who's a nuclear physicist. And I felt humiliated. I felt humiliated because I was a victim and he was the perpetrator of a crime. And how could you be praising the perpetrator of a crime at his sentencing? What about my feelings? Don't I matter? You know? You are praising this gentleman who did a criminal act, who 12 jurors believed committed murder and manslaughter. And then she gave him 9 years.
Askia's family, though devastated, felt some measure of justice had been served. They had lost a son who had only just begun to chase his dreams, and now, at the very least, someone was being held accountable. But the story didn't end there. Beckwith's legal team quickly filed an appeal, arguing that while the circumstances were tragic, they did not meet the legal threshold for second-degree murder. In their view, the charge was an overreach, and in time, Maryland's courts would agree. In January 2021, nearly 2 years after Daniel Beckwith's conviction, the Maryland Court of Special Appeals issued a decision that shook the foundation of the original trial. The court agreed with the defense. Beckwith's actions, however negligent, however bizarre, did not legally constitute depraved heart murder. The ruling wasn't about whether Beckwith was responsible for Askia Kaffer's death. That part had already been made clear. What the court questioned was whether his recklessness truly met the legal standard of extreme disregard for human life. They concluded it did not. The murder conviction was overturned. Still, the court upheld Beckwith's conviction for involuntary manslaughter, reaffirming that his negligence had indeed caused a preventable death. But without the murder charge, his original sentence was no longer applicable. Beckwith was sent back to court for resentencing. In September 2021, the new sentence was handed down: 5 years in prison with credit for time already served. Given his good behavior and time already spent behind bars, Daniel Beckwith would be a free man before long. For Askia's family, it was a brutal blow. The man whose recklessness had led to their son's death would serve less time than many nonviolent offenders. To them, the system had favored technicalities over justice. They argued that the case wasn't just about faulty wiring, it was about power, manipulation, and the exploitation of a vulnerable young man. Outside the courtroom, the case continued to spark debate. Some saw Beckwith as a tragic figure himself, a mentally unwell recluse whose paranoia had gotten out of hand. Others saw him as a privileged eccentric who used his money and legal resources to avoid accountability. Media outlets dubbed the case the bunker death, and true crime forums lit up with theories and outrage. The surreal nature of the crime, tunnels, blindfolds, doomsday prepping, made it a case unlike any other. But underneath the strangeness was a deeply familiar truth. Workplace safety matters, and negligence, especially from those with power, can be just as deadly as violence. The case raised difficult legal questions. Where is the line between criminal negligence and murder? Should someone be held responsible not just for what they do, but for what they fail to do? And when eccentricity turns deadly, how much weight should mental health and intent carry? For Beckwith, life would never be the same. Even after his release, he remained under public scrutiny. A man whose underground fears had destroyed someone else's future. For Askia's family, the pain lingers. They remember a son full of ambition and promise, one who believed he could climb the ladder of success, and who instead died alone in the dark, building someone else's bunker. In the end, the tunnels were sealed. The house, once a secret fortress, became a crime scene. The paranoia that fueled its creation ultimately gave way to tragedy. And in a chilling irony, the man trying to prepare for doomsday had caused one for someone else. The case of Askia Kafra and Daniel Beckwith remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession, the limits of trust, and the lives that can be lost when safety takes a backseat to secrecy.
Winnebago 911.
A man was shot.
Are you with the person right now?
Yes.
Is he breathing?
Yes.
Okay. Where is the assailant?
Somewhere in the house.
Okay, is it male, female?
Female.
For a woman accused of murdering her boyfriend in Menasha.
Killing happened in February in Menasha.
The court commissioner set bond at $1 million for Catherine Chesky, the woman accused of shooting and killing her 71-year-old boyfriend at their Menasha home last week.
And found 54-year-old Catherine Ann Chesky guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
I shot somebody. I'd have a whole lot more blood on me. He was my second shot at love. He's not dead. He can't be dead. Oh my God, no!
Menasha, Wisconsin, nestled along the Fox River, is the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where snow blankets the roofs like frosting in winter, and where time moves just a little bit slower. It's not the sort of town you expect to wake up to murder headlines.
The court commissioner set bond at $1 million for Catherine Chesky, the woman accused of shooting and killing her 71-year-old boyfriend at their Menasha home last week. Chesky is now charged with first-degree intentional homicide.
But on the morning of February 24th, 2024, police responded to a call from a quiet residential block on Chute Street. What they found inside one of those homes would shatter the illusion of calm and raise questions that no one in this town was prepared to answer. A single gunshot had pierced the silence of dawn. No one had called it in, not from inside the house. The 911 call came from a neighbor, someone who had heard an argument followed by a loud, unmistakable sound.
Winnebago 911.
A man was shot.
Are you with the person right now?
Yes.
Is he breathing?
Yes.
Okay. Where is the assailant?
Somewhere in the house.
Okay, is it male, female?
Female.
A sound that told them something was very, very wrong. When officers entered the home, they found a scene that felt more surreal than sinister at first glance. A 55-year-old woman sitting naked on the living room couch, wrapped in a blanket, saying no one had been harmed. Her demeanor was calm, eerily so. That woman was Catherine Chesky, and just a few feet away in the bedroom lay the body of Thomas Guyette, a 71-year-old man who had once been her partner, her companion, maybe even the love of her life. Now he was dead, killed by a single bullet to the chest, fired from close range.
Closing arguments wrapped up and jury deliberation is underway for a woman accused of murdering her boyfriend in Menasha.
Winnebago County jury has reached a verdict in the trial of a woman charged with the deadly shooting of her boyfriend.
The killing happened in February in Menasha.
Well, Tom and Michelle, after almost 4 hours of deliberating, the jury reached a verdict and found 54-year-old Catherine Ann Chesky guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
No sign of struggle, no call for help, no explanation that made any sense. But this was no random act of violence. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong or a stranger's rage spilling into a stranger's home. This was something far more intimate and far more dangerous. The kind of danger that brews behind closed doors and builds slowly, day after day, until one morning it explodes. Neighbors had seen the cracks, frequent yelling, late-night arguments, slamming doors, but no one expected it would come to this. A domestic disturbance? Maybe. But murder? Not here. Not from Catherine, who often kept to herself. Not from a woman who now claims she was legally blind and unable to shoot a target even if she tried. But nothing about this case was as it seemed. Catherine would go on to offer multiple versions of the same story, none of them consistent. First, she claimed the gun simply went off as she tried to take it from Thomas. Then, she suggested that maybe Thomas shot himself. Later, she mentioned her deteriorating vision, saying she couldn't have possibly aimed, and all the while the evidence was piling up. Gunshot residue on her hands. No sign of forced entry. An audio recording, nearly an hour long, of the final argument between them. Words that cut deeper than any weapon, painting a picture of a toxic, volatile relationship that had been spiraling for years. The case was a ticking time bomb. Prosecutors would eventually argue that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a premeditated act, a final eruption after years of emotional warfare. But the defense had their own version of the story. Catherine, they said, had been emotionally abused, berated, and beaten down over time. The shooting, they claimed, wasn't murder. It was a reaction, a breaking point.
I took the gun away from him.
Okay, well,
I went in the bedroom and I took the gun away from him. How could he be dead? I took the gun away from him. I heard the gun go off and I took it away from him and I took it in the living room.
What really happened in that house that morning? Was it an act of cold-blooded rage or the desperate move of a woman pushed too far? Why didn't she call for help? And how does a person go from living with someone to taking their life? As the trial unfolded, it became clear that this case wasn't just about one bullet. It was about every word, every scream, every moment that led up to that final silence. A silence so thick it could only be broken by a single sound, the echo of a gunshot. This is the story of Thomas Guyette, the man who died, of Catherine Chesky, the woman who stood accused, and of the fragile line between love and loathing, one that once crossed can never be uncrossed. Stay with us, because nothing about this case is simple, and the truth, well, the truth might be the darkest thing of all. In every town, there are stories whispered behind curtains, relationships that seem strained, couples who argue too loudly, too often. On the surface, they're just another couple navigating the complexities of life. But behind closed doors, something darker brews. For Thomas Guyette and Catherine Chesky, their relationship was a slow descent into emotional chaos, marked by volatility, mistrust, and conflict that had been simmering long before that fatal February morning. Thomas A. Guyette, 71, had lived in Menasha, Wisconsin for many years. To most who knew him casually, he was quiet and kept to himself. He wasn't particularly social, but neither was he a recluse. He had a small circle and, by all accounts, lived a relatively low-key life. Age was catching up with him, but he still maintained a sense of independence and a sharp temper that neighbors occasionally overheard during his spats with Catherine. Catherine Ann Chesky, 55, had her own set of challenges. She had been legally blind for several years, something she often cited in moments of frustration or defense. She was unemployed and had a reputation for being emotionally volatile. Her relationship with Thomas was her primary anchor to the outside world, but that anchor seemed to drag rather than steady her. Friends and neighbors knew little about her life before she met Thomas, but what they saw after they started living together painted a troubling picture. The pair shared a residence on Chute Street in a modest two-story home divided into units. Catherine and Thomas occupied the upper level. From the beginning, their cohabitation was marked by tension. Neighbors often reported raised voices, banging furniture, and arguments that echoed through the walls at all hours of the night. There were moments of quiet, yes, but they were always temporary. The underlying instability of their relationship never truly went away. Despite the turbulence, they stayed together. Whether out of necessity, codependence, or something else entirely, no one could say. There were no reports of physical violence serious enough to warrant arrests, but police had visited the residence multiple times over the years in response to domestic disturbance calls. Each time, the matter was either de-escalated or resolved without further incident. But each visit was another thread unraveling the frayed bond between them. By 2024, things seemed to have worsened. Catherine had become more withdrawn, and Thomas was increasingly irritable. The two had fallen into a toxic cycle of arguments, reconciliations, and silences that spoke louder than words. Friends and neighbors alike noticed that Catherine, once somewhat sociable, had become isolated. She rarely left the house, and when she did, she often looked disheveled or agitated. Thomas, on the other hand, had become sharper in tone, his patience thinning, his temper flaring more easily. Financial strain may have also played a role. Both were living on limited means with no clear sign of outside income. The pressures of aging, illness, and isolation were weighing down on them, individually and as a couple. Catherine's legal blindness had become a defining feature of her defense later in court.
Being legally blind, I can't fire a gun. I mean, there's no way I could ever aim and shoot and actually hit something.
Let's go
and
back
if I
a little
did, I mean, it would be like on one shot. Better play the lottery then.
But within the household, it may have contributed to growing frustration and dependency. What's striking is how familiar this scenario is to law enforcement and domestic violence advocates. A pattern of emotional escalation, the absence of meaningful intervention, and a slow decline into psychological warfare. Each argument chips away at the foundation of trust until there's nothing left but resentment and sometimes rage. The audio recording recovered and later presented in court revealed just how toxic their final hours were. While that recording would only come into public knowledge during the trial, it served as a chilling insight into a relationship that had deteriorated beyond repair. For nearly an hour, the two hurled accusations, insults, and emotional wounds at one another. It wasn't a single fight. It was a culmination of years of unresolved hostility compressed into one final explosion. Catherine and Thomas had no children together. There were no close family members living nearby. It was just the two of them, locked in a spiraling dance of codependency and animosity, trapped in a house that became both a home and a battleground. By the time the sun rose on February 24th, 2024, their story had already written its final chapter. But in order to understand how it ended, one must first understand how it began. Two people, both isolated, both struggling, clinging to each other not out of love, but because they had nowhere else to go. And in that house on Chute Street, that helplessness turned fatal. It was just after 5 a.m. on February 24th, 2024, when the tranquility of Chute Street in Menasha, Wisconsin, was pierced by a single sharp sound, a gunshot. It came from the upstairs unit of a modest home, but the woman inside didn't scream. She didn't flee. She didn't call for help. Instead, she sat on the couch, naked, wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by silence. It wasn't until a downstairs neighbor, alarmed by the argument that had preceded the shot, dialed 911 that authorities were even aware something had gone terribly wrong. When officers arrived, they were met with an unusual and deeply unsettling sight. The front door opened to reveal Catherine Chesky, disheveled and barely clothed, her demeanor calm, almost vacant. There was no panic in her voice, no visible distress. She told police no one had been shot. Her flat denial only deepened the confusion as officers stepped into the dimly lit apartment and began their search. What they found in the bedroom froze the scene in time. Thomas Guillet, 71, lay dead on the bed, a gunshot wound to his chest, the blood staining the sheets beneath him. The shot had been fired at close range, something the coroner's later report would confirm as a contact wound. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no defensive wounds, just a lifeless body and a woman who hadn't lifted a finger to help. And that was the first major red flag. No 911 call from Catherine. In the critical minutes following the shooting, she made no effort to seek emergency assistance, to render aid, or even to acknowledge what had happened. The gravity of that inaction weighed heavily in the minds of investigators from the start. As officers continued their sweep of the home, Catherine began to speak, offering explanations without being asked. She claimed the gun had gone off accidentally while she was trying to wrest it away from Thomas. Then she said maybe he had shot himself. Later, she insisted her legal blindness made it improbable that she could have even aimed a gun. But the gun was found near the scene, and forensic testing would eventually tell a different story. When detectives arrived to question her, the contradictions only grew. Catherine couldn't clearly explain where the gun had come from or how the shooting had occurred. Her statements were riddled with inconsistencies. In one version, she had the gun. In another, Thomas did. Sometimes she said it discharged during a struggle. Other times, she blamed the incident entirely on him. Her explanations changed as frequently as her tone. But one detail remained consistent. She never called for help. Crime scene technicians processed the room meticulously. The wound's location and angle ruled out suicide almost immediately. There was no stippling, no hesitation wound, no suggestion that Thomas had done this to himself. But the most damning discovery came during forensic analysis. Gunshot residue, GSR, was found on Catherine's hands. This scientific evidence stood in direct contradiction to her defense. If she truly hadn't fired the weapon, how had GSR ended up on her skin? And if she was as visually impaired as she claimed, how had she managed to shoot a man with such lethal precision from such a close distance? Adding to the complexity was the audio recording. Though its full contents wouldn't be revealed until trial, investigators obtained a nearly hour-long audio file from a device in the apartment, perhaps a phone inadvertently recording or intentionally set up during the argument. The recording captured the raw, aggressive exchange between Catherine and Thomas. It was a verbal war, heated, cruel, and emotionally charged. Catherine's voice was sharp, relentless. Thomas, too, fought back with scathing remarks. It was not a moment of passion, it was a culmination of rage. What had started as another argument between two people stuck in a cycle of resentment ended with a gunshot and a corpse in a bedroom. Catherine's emotional state post-shooting was as haunting as the act itself. Not frantic, not remorseful. Just still. In that moment, investigators weren't just trying to piece together a crime. They were trying to unravel the psychology of a woman who had spent the minutes after a man's death sitting silently, offering no help, no apology, no answers. The facts were growing more undeniable by the hour. The physical evidence, the contradictions in Catherine's account, and her unnerving calm in the face of tragedy all painted a chilling portrait. Whether out of rage, fear, or something far more sinister, Catherine Chesky had pulled the trigger. And the man she once shared a home and a life with was now reduced to a headline and a growing list of unanswered questions. With the crime scene secured and Thomas Guillet's lifeless body removed from the bedroom, the Menasha Police Department turned its attention to what would become a complex and psychologically layered investigation. From the outset, nothing about Catherine Chesky's behavior made sense. Her calm demeanor, the lack of a 911 call, the vague and shifting explanations, each of these details raised red flags. But police knew that gut feelings weren't enough. They needed evidence, concrete, irrefutable proof to explain what had happened in that apartment. The first piece of the puzzle came from Catherine herself. Almost immediately after the shooting, she began speaking to officers without being prompted.
So
He can't be because we're getting married.
so it's very, like, that's why what you can tell us is very, very important about everything of how that happened, right?
You guys are You He's not dead. He can't be dead. He can't be dead. He was my second shot at love. He can't be dead. Oh my God, no. No. Oh my God.
Her stories were riddled with contradictions. She first claimed that she and Thomas had been arguing and that he had retrieved the gun himself. According to this version, she tried to take it from him and it discharged during the struggle. Then, in a different account, she suggested that perhaps Thomas had shot himself. Still later, she added that due to her legal blindness, she couldn't have aimed a gun well enough to hit anyone intentionally. She said the weapon just went off. These shifting narratives didn't align with the physical evidence. The gunshot wound on Thomas was classified as a contact wound, meaning the gun had been pressed directly against his body when it fired. Suicide was ruled out early, both due to the angle of the wound and the nature of the scene. The position of the body, the blood spatter, and the location of the gun all suggested that someone else had pulled the trigger and done so from extremely close range. Then came the forensic results. Gunshot residue, GSR testing, was conducted on both Catherine and the surrounding area. The results were damning. GSR was found on her hands, a key indicator that she had discharged a firearm or been in very close proximity when the gun was fired. While Catherine tried to argue that GSR could transfer through other means, such as touching the gun after it had been fired, investigators were not convinced, especially when combined with her failure to call emergency services and her inconsistencies. Another key discovery came from a downstairs neighbor who reported hearing an hour-long argument leading up to the gunshot. That neighbor also provided information that led to the recovery of a recorded audio file from a device inside the home, likely a smartphone that had either been intentionally set to record or captured the incident accidentally. The contents of that recording would become central to the prosecution's case. Though the full tape wasn't released to the public during the investigation phase, police reviewed it extensively. The recording painted a picture of a toxic, emotionally volatile relationship that had spiraled far beyond typical domestic disputes. The voices of Catherine and Thomas could be heard escalating into vicious accusations, demeaning language, and increasingly aggressive exchanges. Catherine was reportedly heard shouting, crying, and threatening, while Thomas responded with equally harsh verbal attacks. It was a verbal war that had clearly been fought many times before, but this time it ended with a gunshot. The emotional content of the audio wasn't the only damning element. There were no signs of self-defense injuries on Catherine, no bruising or indications that she had been physically attacked prior to the shooting. In fact, there were no visible signs that Thomas had even attempted to harm her that morning. That, coupled with her post-incident inaction, no attempt to revive him, no emergency call, not even a plea for help, strengthened the argument that this wasn't a moment of accidental chaos, but rather an intentional act carried out in the heat of rage. Investigators also examined the firearm itself. The gun was legally owned by Thomas, but it was found near the scene, within easy reach of where Catherine had been located. Ballistics confirmed it as the weapon used in the shooting. There were no signs of misfire or malfunction. The gun had operated exactly as it should, and there was no physical evidence suggesting that it had discharged by accident. As detectives compiled their findings, the case against Catherine grew stronger. Her credibility, already undermined by her inconsistent accounts, collapsed under the weight of the physical evidence and forensic data. Though she insisted she had never meant for anyone to get hurt, her actions told a different story. And the deeper investigators dug into the relationship between her and Thomas, the more it became clear that this was not a one-time outburst. It was the tragic crescendo of years of unchecked dysfunction. By the time the case was handed over to the district attorney, the pieces had formed a grim but coherent narrative. Catherine Chesky had shot and killed Thomas Guyette, and while she might have seen herself as a victim of verbal abuse and emotional torment, the law saw something else, a woman who had chosen silence over accountability and who would now face the full weight of justice. By December 2024, nearly 10 months after the fatal shooting of Thomas Guyette, the case of Catherine Chesky entered the courtroom, dragging with it layers of emotional baggage, conflicting narratives, and a community still trying to understand how a relationship had spiraled into deadly violence. The courtroom in Winnebago County became the final battleground between two versions of the same story, one told by the prosecution, sharp and fact-based, and the other by the defense, raw with emotion and laced with claims of long-term abuse. From the very first day, the prosecution wasted no time laying out its theory. Catherine Chesky intentionally shot and killed Thomas Guyette during a heated argument, then failed to call for help or take responsibility. They framed her actions not as a momentary lapse or accident, but a massive overreaction, a deliberate decision made during an emotionally charged confrontation. Prosecutors walked the jury through the forensic evidence, highlighting the gunshot residue on Catherine's hands, the close contact nature of the wound, and, most damningly, her failure to call 911 after the shooting. They played the nearly hour-long audio recording of the argument leading up to the shooting. The courtroom fell silent as jurors listened to the chaos unfold in real time. The voices of Catherine and Thomas could be heard, sharp, bitter, and emotionally raw. The prosecution used this as a cornerstone of their argument. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, and it ended with Catherine making a choice, a fatal one. One of the detectives testified that Catherine offered at least 4 different versions of what had happened that morning. Each one shifted responsibility or softened the facts, and none matched the forensic timeline. She said the gun went off during a struggle, the detective told the jury. Then she said Thomas shot himself. Later, she said she was legally blind and couldn't have hit a target, but the evidence says otherwise. To further discredit her claims, prosecutors introduced ballistics and forensic analysis, showing the trajectory and angle of the bullet, confirming it was not an accidental discharge, nor self-inflicted. The location of the gun, the lack of struggle marks on Catherine, and the complete absence of any CPR attempts or emergency calls all painted a chilling picture. To the state, this wasn't just murder, it was intentional, cold, and calculated. But the defense had its own strategy. They didn't deny that Catherine had fired the shot. Instead, they attempted to reframe the context. Catherine was a woman pushed to the brink by years of verbal and emotional abuse. They painted Thomas as a man who, though never criminally charged, had been relentlessly cruel, demeaning, and psychologically controlling. Her legal blindness, they argued, left her vulnerable and dependent, and in a moment of panic, she reacted not out of malice, but desperation. Defense attorneys replayed parts of the same audio recording, urging the jury to listen not just to what was said, but how it was said. Catherine's voice trembled, cracked with emotion. Thomas, at times, was heard berating her, dismissing her, fueling the volatile atmosphere. She was terrified, her lawyer told the jury. This wasn't premeditated, it was survival. They brought in a psychologist who testified that Catherine may have suffered from a form of battered woman syndrome, a controversial but occasionally accepted defense in domestic homicide cases. The doctor explained how chronic emotional abuse can erode judgment, trigger hyperreactivity, and create a distorted sense of reality during moments of extreme stress. Still, the prosecution responded forcefully. If she was terrified, why didn't she call for help afterward? The district attorney asked. Why didn't she try to save him? Why sit on the couch, silent, while a man lay dying in the next room? The question lingered, unanswered. Catherine did not take the stand. Her defense team feared that under cross-examination, her conflicting stories and calm demeanor might work against her. Instead, they let the arguments and testimony speak for her. But in the end, the jury wasn't swayed. After less than 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came in, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. As the sentence was read, Catherine showed little emotion, just a slight nod, as if she had already accepted her fate. The courtroom remained still, the weight of the decision heavy in the air. The woman who once shared a home with Thomas Guyette would now spend decades behind bars for his murder. The case wasn't over yet. There would be motions, an appeal, and a restitution hearing still to come. But the trial had delivered its final judgment. The truth, the jury decided, was simple. Catherine Chesky pulled the trigger, and for that, she would pay the ultimate legal price. The conviction of Catherine Chesky brought a sense of closure, but it also left behind an unsettling silence in the community of Menasha. On February 18, 2025, nearly a year after the murder of 71-year-old Thomas Guyette, Catherine stood before the court to hear her sentence. Life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She was 55 at the time. The courtroom remained still as the judge delivered the sentence, denying the defense's request to stay the judgment while they pursued an appeal. It was a clear and final declaration. This was no accident, no momentary loss of control. It was murder. The judge highlighted not just the act itself, but Catherine's chilling lack of response afterward. The fact that she never called 911, never tried to help, never expressed remorse. Her silence had spoken louder than any defense could muster. The prosecution reminded the court of the audio recording, the gunshot residue, and her many conflicting statements, all pointing to deliberate intent. For those who knew the couple, the sentence was heavy but necessary. Neighbors had heard their arguments for years but never imagined it would come to this. In a house where shouting had once been routine, now there was only the echo of what had been lost. A restitution hearing was scheduled for March 4th, 2025, though no monetary figure could ever compensate for the life that was taken. There was no large public outcry, no national attention. But for a small community, the lesson struck deep. Domestic abuse isn't always visible. Sometimes it hides in routine arguments, in emotional scars, in the slow erosion of peace. Catherine Chesky now faces the reality of spending the rest of her life behind bars. And while the law has spoken, the emotional wreckage left behind will linger for far longer than any sentence ever could. Catherine Chesky didn't just pull the trigger. She sat in silence afterward, wrapped in a blanket, while Thomas lay dead just steps away. No cries for help, no panic, only cold stillness. And that eerie stillness may haunt those who followed the case more than the violence itself. This wasn't a story of a sudden breakdown or a one-time mistake. It was a crescendo of unresolved conflict, dependence, and bitterness. The emotional abuse Catherine claimed to endure may have been real. The dysfunction between them may have been mutual. But the court determined that none of it justified ending a man's life. Now she serves a life sentence in a state facility where her world has shrunk to a cell and routine. Her name has become synonymous with betrayal in Menasha, while Thomas has become a symbol of a fate no one expected. A man dying in silence, not from a stranger's malice, but from domestic rage. This case leaves behind uncomfortable truths. That emotional abuse can escalate into fatal outcomes. That victims don't always look like victims. That perpetrators aren't always monsters in the dark, but sometimes people hiding in plain sight. Let this story be a reminder. What happens behind closed doors can destroy lives. And if we ignore the signs, we risk waking up one day to a silence that says everything. If you found this story insightful, disturbing, or thought-provoking, like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that uncover the unsettling truths we too often overlook. Because sometimes the quietest houses hide the loudest tragedies.
Appeals court upholds Cedar Rapids man's 3 convictions for killing his family.
Someone broke into our house. Our address is 4414 Oak Leaf Court, Northeast. I've been shot. My other family member's been shot. I need help immediately.
Police expect that, though. We got a thorn sheriff. How's this down here? Hey, who are you?
Dad.
That's your dad? What happened?
What happened? There. He came down. There was a man.
Jackson's story about an intruder being the shooter also wasn't plausible because he had no defensive wounds, nothing was disturbed in the house, and there was no sign of forced entry.
When a call comes in about a possible break-in in an upscale neighborhood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, officers aren't sure what they're going to be walking into. It's a crime which leaves investigators wondering, is the caller a victim or is he hiding a darker truth?
On June 15th, 2021, a peaceful suburban morning in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, turned into a scene of unimaginable horror. Inside a quiet family home, 3 lives were stolen in an act so brutal that it left an entire community reeling. The victims were not strangers to their killer. They were his own family. Today, we're covering one of the most shocking family murder cases in recent American history, a crime rooted in fear, resentment, and a chilling lack of remorse. This is the horrifying story of Alexander Ken Jackson and the calculated murder of his father, mother, and sister. A case that raised disturbing questions about what truly lies beneath the surface of family life. When you think of Cedar Rapids, you might picture tree-lined streets, tidy lawns, and neighbors greeting each other as they head out for work. But behind the doors of one home, a dark and twisted plan was unfolding. On that June morning, 20-year-old Alexander picked up his family's rifle and unleashed violence that detectives would later describe as both methodical and merciless. What could drive a son to commit such an unthinkable act? Was it desperation, fear, or something far more sinister within his mind? As the investigation unfolded, police uncovered evidence that painted a picture of a young man spiraling under the weight of expectations and failures, a spiral that would end in the brutal execution of his own family. If you're drawn to true crime stories like this, make sure to keep watching as we dive into the twisted story of Alexander Ken Jackson. A case that proves sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who live right under your roof. The Jackson family seemed like any other middle-class household in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Their home at 4414 Oak Leaf Court sat at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac, its front yard neatly trimmed and windows adorned with seasonal wreaths. Neighbors often described them as quiet but kind, a family that mostly kept to themselves, but always offered a smile in passing. At the head of the household was Jan Jackson, a 61-year-old retired systems analyst who spent decades working in the IT sector. Melissa Jackson, his 68-year-old wife, worked part-time at a local church, volunteering as an administrative assistant. She was known for her gentle nature, often bringing homemade cookies for parish meetings and checking in on elderly neighbors. Then there was Sabrina, just 19 years old, vibrant and full of life. She had recently graduated high school and was taking time to decide her career path. And finally, there was Alexander, known as Alex to his friends, a tall, soft-spoken 20-year-old with an unassuming presence. He was enrolled at the University of Iowa, though his academic performance had been faltering. Records revealed he was struggling in multiple courses and at risk of failing out. He spent much of his time at home, rarely socializing on campus, and friends noted he seemed overwhelmed by academic demands. Alexander's relationship with his father was strained. Jan's disciplined and firm parenting clashed with Alexander's passive and hesitant nature. In quiet moments, he confided in friends about feeling the pressure of expectations he felt he could never meet. Financially, Alexander was entirely dependent on his parents. He had no job, no steady income, and his bank account barely held $30 at the time of the murders. Investigators later revealed that Alexander often expressed anxiety about his future. He feared his father would soon force him to get a job or move out of the house, something that terrified him beyond words.
I know more about an audience. Does he get along with it? Would you? The wiring that sounds we drop. So we drop. Well, but in party, well, let's shoot you. If I'm going to pay for half of your college, you're going to get a job. If you're going to pay for the other half, you're not showing any effort. You haven't shown a trial of effort to go get a job.
Former classmates described him as quiet, polite, and almost invisible in group discussions. Professors remembered him as a student who turned in assignments late or incomplete, but never caused disruptions. He was the type of person easily overlooked in a crowded hallway, someone who drifted by without making an impression. It was this very nature, unassuming and soft-spoken, that made the events of June 15th all the more shocking. At 8:23 a.m., the routine silence shattered with a desperate 911 call. The voice on the other end was shaky, cracking under the weight of fear or pain, or perhaps both. It was Alexander.
Someone broke into our house. Our address is 4414 Oak Leaf Court, Northeast. I've been shot. My other family member's been shot. I need help immediately.
Okay, I'm getting Cedar Rapids on the line here.
I've been shot in the foot.
Okay, sir, stay on the line. Stay with me. Need to be answering. Give them the address right away.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
4414 Oakleaf Court, Northeast.
Okay, what's going on?
There's someone broke in.
Okay.
I've been shot.
You've been shot?
My dad's been shot.
Okay, hold on just a second. Are they still there?
No, they left.
They left? Did they come inside the house?
Yeah.
Okay, where were you shot at?
Downstairs.
No, on your body. On your body, where have you been shot?
Foot.
I'm sorry, where?
Left foot.
In your
Left
foot?
foot.
Okay, how old are you?
20?
How old are you?
20.
20, okay. I've got help coming. Just stay on the line with me, okay?
His words tumbled out between sharp breaths as he clutched his bleeding foot. The dispatcher kept him on the line, asking question after question in an attempt to keep him conscious and gather details for responding officers.
Could you tell if it was a man or a woman?
Man.
A man? Could you tell if they were white, black, Hispanic? That's okay if you don't know. Just stay on the line with me, okay? What's your first name?
I'm Alex.
Alex, is that help coming, okay? Just stay on the line with me and don't hang up, okay? The number I have is
I think I spooked.
You think what?
I'm not wrong.
You're doing just fine, Alex. Just stay on the line with me. What do you think happened?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it just your foot?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
That's funny.
Okay, do you have a dry clean cloth or towel you can put on there so we can control the bleeding?
I tried to put a belt on my leg, but it broke.
You tried to do a tourniquet and it broke?
Yeah.
Okay, do you have a cloth or a towel, a shirt, anything that's clean and dry?
I can go get one.
Okay, if you can get one.
Within minutes, Cedar Rapids police arrived at 4414 Oakleaf Court. Body cam footage later shown in court captured the tense atmosphere. Officers approached cautiously, weapons drawn, scanning the driveway and side yards for any sign of the reported intruder. The front door was unlocked. As they stepped inside, the stillness was unnerving. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. The home remained eerily pristine, disturbed only by the faint sounds of Alexander's cries from deeper within. They found him sitting on the hallway floor, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, his right foot smeared with blood. His face was pale, eyes darting frantically between officers.
Multiple victims. One has a gunshot wound, the other is wounded in the leg.
Who's this down here?
Hey, who are you?
My dad. Is that your dad?
What happened?
He came down. There was a man.
Who shot your... Who else is here?
My sister. She's back? Yeah, she's in her room.
Is she okay?
I think so.
Officers quickly secured him, ensuring there was no immediate threat before tending to his injury. But even as they applied pressure to his wound, their eyes scanned the surroundings with growing unease. Moving further into the home, officers discovered Jan Jackson's body first. He lay motionless near his recliner, pools of blood soaking into the carpet beneath him. Multiple gunshot wounds riddled his chest and torso, suggesting he never stood a chance to react. The scene was disturbingly clean, aside from the splatter of violence that ended his life. Officers continued upstairs, calling out in hopes of finding survivors. The silence that greeted them was suffocating. In the master bedroom, they found Melissa Jackson. She lay across her bed, her body twisted unnaturally.
Looks like a master bedroom. Fourth victim. That could be the wife. Yep. 692. We have a fourth victim. Upstairs bedroom.
She had been shot multiple times, leaving no possibility of survival. The room around her remained untouched. A pair of reading glasses sat atop her Bible on the nightstand. Finally, officers entered Sabrina's room.
Where's the next one? Another gunshot to the head. Okay. I don't know where the entrance went. Jesus Christ. Another teenager.
Her posters of favorite pop singers and art sketches lined the walls, and her makeup table was neatly organized. But Sabrina herself lay lifeless on the floor near her closet, her body riddled with gunshot wounds. Her phone buzzed with notifications from friends, unaware she would never reply again. The sight was devastating. A young life abruptly ended in the space where she had felt safest. Meanwhile, paramedics attended to Alexander in the ambulance parked outside. His foot injury appeared non-life-threatening, the bullet having passed through the flesh without shattering bone. As he was transported to the hospital, officers secured the scene. They began the meticulous process of documenting every inch of the home, photographing blood spatter patterns, fingerprints, and the locations of spent shell casings. One item stood out immediately: the Browning .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle, lying on the floor near Jan's body. It was clean, undamaged, and bore no signs of an intruder's hurried escape. Officers noted it belonged to the Jackson family, a detail that added a disturbing complexity to the scene. If this was a burglary gone wrong, why would the intruder use a weapon found within the home instead of bringing one? Why was nothing stolen? No jewelry missing, no electronics grabbed. Outside, crime scene tape went up as neighbors gathered at the ends of their driveways, whispering in shock. News vans soon arrived, broadcasting scenes of officers walking in and out of the house, medical examiners removing bodies on stretchers covered in white sheets. The initial story was clear: a tragic home invasion, leaving 3 dead and 1 wounded. But inside the house, seasoned detectives exchanged glances of unease. Something didn't fit. The puzzle pieces of this crime were lying scattered before them. But as they began to place them together, a far darker image would soon emerge. One that no one, not even the closest neighbors or extended family, could have imagined. This was not the work of a stranger lurking in the shadows. This horror, they feared, was born within these very walls. As officers secured the Jackson home and medical examiners began their grim work, detectives gathered in the driveway, already piecing together the inconsistencies of Alexander's story. The house was too pristine for a supposed home invasion that ended in the brutal murder of 3 family members. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass, and no footprints or foreign fingerprints indicating an intruder's presence. Alexander was transported to the hospital with a gunshot wound to his foot. The injury appeared superficial, with the bullet passing cleanly through without damaging bone. Detectives soon arrived at his bedside, notebooks in hand, their questions calm yet probing. He recounted his story in halting whispers. An intruder, a black man wearing green shoes, had broken into the house through the basement, retrieved the family's rifle, shot his father, and then moved upstairs to kill his mother and sister.
You let them take the house. There you go. Dad, sister, and dog.
What time did you wake up this morning?
I woke up and heard gunshots. I went inside.
You take your time, Daddy.
He's taller than me, I think. I don't know where he was there. I heard him downstairs, so I went downstairs. He was messing with my dad's gun.
Did he have a mask on?
Oh yeah, one of those ski masks or whatever.
Did you see his hair?
No.
What about his shoes?
I think they're green.
But as he spoke, his eyes remained downcast, avoiding the detective's unwavering gazes. One investigator later testified that Alexander's demeanor was oddly detached, as though he were reciting lines rehearsed in his mind rather than reliving a traumatic event.
Again, they ask him questions about the intruder, about what the intruder looked like, how it was that the intruder came in throughout the questioning, whether it be in the house, in the ambulance, at the hospital. He's not very specific. He describes them as male black. He describes something that they're wearing. He describes at one point the guy cursing, but he really doesn't give any substantive descriptions of this person such that one would expect they'd ever be able to find that person.
His statements were riddled with pauses and changes. At first, he said he fought the intruder. Later, he said he never saw the man's face. His descriptions of the suspect's clothing shifted between interviews. Detectives began to suspect they weren't listening to a terrified victim, but rather to someone attempting to maintain a crumbling lie. Back at the crime scene, forensic teams examined the Browning Point .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle used in the murders. The weapon belonged to the Jackson family and was stored in an accessible area of the home. Investigators noted the rifle's unique reloading mechanism, so intricate that even a firearms expert had to research it online before testifying about it in court. This was a crucial finding. For an intruder to arrive unprepared, discover a weapon in the house, and know how to reload it efficiently during a triple murder was highly improbable. The killer had to have prior knowledge of how the weapon operated.
As our investigator began to process the firearm, he himself could not figure out how to load this gun. Trained law enforcement weapon processor had to watch a YouTube video of this specific model of firearm to figure out how to load it. Not only did this phantom burglar come into the Jackson home to hurt people without a weapon, but he used a weapon that just happened to be laying out on the fireplace mantle and figured out how to load it and then reload it during this killing spree.
Latent fingerprint analysis yielded further damning evidence. Alexander's palm prints were found on the rifle, in positions consistent with loading and firing. While his prints being on a family weapon was not suspicious in itself, their placement, combined with the absence of any other usable prints, undermined his story. Furthermore, blood spatter analysis on Alexander's shorts indicated backspatter patterns consistent with firing the weapon at close range, suggesting he was present at the time of the shootings in a way that contradicted his victim narrative. Investigators also reviewed surveillance footage from the family home and neighboring properties. No unknown individuals were captured entering or exiting during the time frame of the murders. There were no tire tracks, footprints, or evidence of anyone fleeing on foot or by vehicle. The supposed intruder vanished without a trace, an impossibility in the eyes of seasoned detectives.
Do you want our report to reflect that there was a guy in your house that there's no evidence of? Well, yeah, of course there's a guy in my house. Listen to me. Do you want us to write down in the report that there was a guy in your house, that there's no video of him ever showing up or leaving? Do you want us to put that down, or do you want to give us some sort of an explanation that makes sense? I want the guy to know.
Adding to their suspicions, Alexander's phone records painted a troubling psychological portrait. His search history revealed late-night queries about self-defense shootings, home invasions, and the legal ramifications of murder. This, coupled with his academic failures and fear of eviction, suggested mounting desperation. During questioning, Alexander admitted to detectives that he was terrified of his father forcing him to move out.
How does your dad feel about your career choices or life choices? No, I guess he wants me to more zero in home. Have you ever had any problems with him? Like serious problems with him? Like judging your life or choices? He's proud of me. Yeah, how about now? Yeah. Same? Sister? I guess.
Alex said that his dad had threatened to kick him out or told him he would have to move out if he didn't get a job because he had been going to college, but he dropped out.
It was a confession devoid of emotion, delivered in the same flat tone as his earlier story of the intruder. On June 16th, just one day after the murders, detectives called Alexander back for a formal interview. This time, their questions were sharper, their tone more assertive. They confronted him with the forensic evidence, his palm prints, the reloading mechanism knowledge, the absence of forced entry, the undisturbed home.
You told us where you were at on that thing. So one of the big things that we needed to really hammer out was this video, right? This ring video from your house that would help substantiate some of what you told us. And I talked to my guy Jeff. He does all the forensic or digital forensic type stuff, phones and computers and cameras and things like that for us. Good news, he did a search warrant for the ring and got it back. There are no clips of anyone leaving your house.
Each piece of evidence struck like a hammer against the fragile walls of his fabricated narrative. Still, Alexander stuck to his story, but his affect remained flat. Detectives described the eerie calm in the room as he sat there, his foot bandaged, staring down at his lap. To them, it was not the demeanor of a traumatized victim, but of someone emotionally removed from the reality of their actions. By the following day, the Cedar Rapids Police Department issued an arrest warrant for Alexander Ken Jackson. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and taken into custody without incident. As he was led away in handcuffs, reporters captured his expression. Blank, eyes lowered, lips pressed into a tight line. There was no visible remorse, no tears, no shock. Only silence. The investigation had concluded what no one in the neighborhood wanted to believe. The killer wasn't an intruder lurking in the shadows of suburbia. The killer, they now believed, was the quiet, unassuming son who had lived among them all along. The trial of Alexander Ken Jackson began on January 13, 2023, in a courtroom heavy with grief and anticipation. The prosecution entered with boxes of evidence, files stacked high, prepared to piece together a narrative that painted Alexander not as a victim, but as a cold-blooded murderer. In opening statements, the prosecuting attorney walked jurors through the morning of June 15, 2021, describing how Jan Jackson was found shot to death in the living room, Melissa Jackson dead in her bedroom, and Sabrina Jackson executed in hers. They described how Alexander had called 911 with dramatic claims of an intruder who shot him in the foot after killing his family.
On June 15th of 2021, a 911 call went out early in the morning hours. That call was made by the defendant, stating someone had broken into our house and shot me and my family. This call went on for 15 minutes. And you're going to hear the entirety of this call. And even in this call begins inconsistencies with what the defendant said had happened on that date in question. What the majority of that call focused on was this person breaking in, and that there was a struggle, and the defendant got shot in the foot. The dispatcher asked multiple times, describe this person. Who else is there? Eventually, the defendant does acknowledge that his sister and mother are home. And then as further conversation goes on in this call, the defendant then says, my sister, my mother, my father. Although the 911 call dispatcher doesn't catch the last that his father is there, because officers will testify when they arrived on scene, what they thought they were going to was not what they expected.
Surveillance footage from surrounding homes showed no intruder entering or exiting. There was no forced entry, no stolen valuables, no signs of struggle within the house. The puzzle remained undisturbed, a silent testament to the absence of chaos. Perhaps most devastating to the defense was the testimony of the lead investigator.
Usually you break into either steal the stuff, or in this case, kill people.
Well, but that occurs, that people come into a home and kill people, right?
Right, but my big problem with that is when you do that, you bring a weapon.
Well, who's to say that this intruder didn't have a weapon?
Why would you use their weapon if you brought one?
Because that's a better weapon. And then Mr. Jackson comes down, Jan Jackson, and he shoots Jan Jackson. That could have happened, right?
The reason I dislike that theory is because if you're going to kill someone while you're, burglarizing their home, you kill people that startle you, that confront you. Why would you kill someone that's in bed that hasn't even seen you? That's the first person that was shot.
Well, who was the first person that was shot?
His sister.
This was a son who executed his entire family to escape a future he refused to face. The defense pleaded with jurors to consider the possibility of a real intruder, warning them of the gravity of convicting an innocent man. But their words seemed to float, weightless, over the heads of a jury already burdened with the chilling reality presented before them. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder.
As to each of the 3 counts, form of verdict 2 has been executed. We, the jury, find the defendant, Alexander Jackson, guilty of the offense of murder in the first degree.
The prosecutor urged the court to impose the maximum sentence, citing the brutality of the murders and the absence of remorse. As the judge pronounced 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, Alexander's eyes remained fixed downward, his face unmoved. In that moment, it became painfully clear to many that the young man before them was no longer just a son or a student. He was now forever branded as a murderer of his own family. Outside the courthouse, cameras captured the emotional statements of extended family members.
Alex wanted everyone to think that he was the victim in this case, and we're very glad today that that was proven to not be true.
Another spoke of the enduring grief, describing how the Jackson family home now stood empty, a haunting reminder of shattered lives within quiet suburban walls. For the Cedar Rapids community, the murders became an unsettling landmark in local history. Neighbors found themselves looking differently at those around them, wondering how such rage and violence could be hidden behind polite smiles and mowed lawns. Some described feelings of guilt, how they never saw signs, how Alexander always seemed so quiet and polite. If he was capable of this, one neighbor said, then what are we missing in others around us? The University of Iowa quietly removed Alexander's student records from public listings, while professors who had taught him spoke privately about his withdrawn demeanor and academic struggles. Some wondered if intervention, academic counseling, mental health support, might have changed the course of events. But others believed his actions were far beyond the scope of institutional help, rooted in something far darker within his psyche. In the legal world, the case became a reference point for motive analysis in familial homicides. Prosecutors across the state noted how fear of independence, academic failure, and perceived parental pressure could combine into a volatile psychological cocktail. Law enforcement training sessions reviewed the investigation as an example of how initial victim narratives can obscure deeper truths, highlighting the importance of forensic consistency over emotional testimony. Meanwhile, appeals were filed by Alexander's legal team. On January 9, 2025, the Iowa Court of Appeals upheld his convictions, rejecting claims of improper evidence handling and unfair trial processes. The court opinion reaffirmed what prosecutors argued from the beginning: the overwhelming forensic evidence, paired with motive and behavioral inconsistencies, justified the jury's decision beyond reasonable doubt. For Melissa and Jan's extended family, however, legal conclusions did little to mend the wounds left behind. Their house, once filled with the sounds of television shows, puzzle pieces clicking into place, and quiet evening conversations, now stood silent, listed for sale by relatives who could not bear to step inside. Neighbors reported seeing lights on inside at night in the weeks following the murders, as investigators worked through evidence and crime scene reconstruction. After the house was cleared, those lights never flickered on again. Sabrina's friends held a candlelight vigil in her honor near the university campus she never got to attend. They spoke of her kindness, her artistic dreams, and how her life had only just begun. Her room remained untouched for months after her death, her makeup brushes still arranged by color, her phone forever silent. In the end, the Jackson family murders left behind an unsettling legacy, a reminder that evil does not always lurk outside in the shadows, but can grow quietly within, unnoticed until it erupts with irreparable consequences. Alexander now spends his days behind bars at the Iowa State Penitentiary, serving 3 life sentences in an environment stripped of comfort, freedom, and family, the very things he destroyed in a desperate bid to keep them. The case of Alexander Ken Jackson forces us to confront a chilling truth about human nature. Sometimes the greatest threats to our safety do not come from strangers lurking in the dark, but from those we trust the most, those who sit beside us at the dinner table and share our last goodnight words. How could a son who lived under his parents' roof for 2 decades turn on them with such calculated violence? Psychologists and criminal behavior analysts examined the case closely. Many noted that Alexander's motive, though seemingly trivial to outsiders, carried devastating psychological weight for him. Fear of losing his safety net, coupled with academic failures and social withdrawal, pushed him into a mental corner. But even with these stressors, most people would seek help, speak to family, or struggle silently rather than resort to bloodshed. What led Alexander down a path of irreversible destruction remains a question without a clear answer. His lack of emotion throughout the trial and after sentencing was unsettling to many. During interviews, detectives described how he spoke of his family's deaths with the same flat tone one might use to recite grocery items. No tears fell when he learned his father, mother, and sister were dead. There was no visible anger at the supposed intruder he blamed. For prosecutors, this emotional void became a silent testimony of guilt, a chilling indicator that he never truly viewed them as loved ones, but rather as obstacles to his comfort and freedom. The house at 4414 Oakleaf Court stands as a somber reminder of the tragedy. It was eventually sold, its walls repainted and rooms refurnished, but the darkness of that morning will always linger there in ways only its walls can remember. Neighbors still walk past it with unease, recalling the crime scene tape that once wrapped around its porch pillars, the flashing lights, and the quiet procession of body bags carried out one by one. For the families left behind, there are no answers sufficient to soothe their grief. John's colleagues remembered him as diligent and fair-minded. Melissa's church community spoke of her generosity and calm presence. Sabrina's friends still post photos with captions about missing her laughter, her sketches, her presence during late-night calls. Their lives ended abruptly in a place meant to keep them safe. Their legacy now lives on in memories, memorials, and the silent prayers of those who loved them. Alexander, now serving his 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, spends his days in a cell far removed from the comforts of his childhood home. Gone are the familiar creaks of the staircase, the scent of his mother's cooking, the quiet hours spent scrolling through his phone under the same roof as his family. Instead, his life is now reduced to cold cement walls, routine head counts, and the reality that he alone destroyed the only support system he ever knew, leaving behind a trail of grief that no prison sentence can ever erase. If you found this story disturbing, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Alexander's sentence was justified, or do you believe something deeper drove him to this horrific decision? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that reveal the darkest corners of the human mind.
"911, what is the address of your emergency? Tell me exactly what happened."
I came into my room and my husband, I think he died. I think he's on the floor. I know he's on the floor. I think he's dead. Come on, honey, wake up. He's cold. He's cold.
It was Heather Fernandez Hofer, a 3rd-grade teacher at McCormick Elementary, reporting something horrifying. Her husband, Robert Hofer, was dead. She claimed she found him in their bedroom, stabbed, cold, unresponsive.
Do you think he's beyond any help?
Yeah, I do. Come on, babe, wake up, babe.
My partner
Babe, wake
is
up.
sending someone to assist you. Please
Honey, wake
leave
up, honey,
everything
wake
as
up.
you found it. Has he been sick?
Well, he injured himself.
How did he injure himself?
He got mad. Babe, come on, babe, wake up, babe.
How did he injure himself?
He cut himself.
If you think he's gone and there's no help, I need for you to walk out of that room and leave him alone, especially if you think this is going to be a... Are you telling me this is a now?
I don't know.
Okay. All right.
Don't do this to me. No.
That call would launch one of the most quietly disturbing murder investigations New Mexico had seen in years. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic case of suicide, a distraught wife, a husband with stab wounds. But as officers arrived at the house on South Ivy Avenue, something didn't sit right.
Ma'am, did you see what happened?
2497.
Where's the blood coming from on him? On his chest?
And I fell asleep on the couch and I came in here and he was on the floor. He was
Okay, watch out. I just need to check his pulse.
He's cold.
He's cold?
Oh,
When did you last see him?
about 3. And I came in just now. And I guess he'd gotten his razor out. I don't know what he did. I don't know.
Do you know what he cut himself with?
He said one of the steak knives, but I couldn't have.
Okay, let's not go reaching around. I just don't want you to get cut, ma'am, in case it's sitting around here.
Say again?
I don't want you reaching around just in case you get cut, okay?
Was he suicidal?
Not that I know of.
Was he laying here in bed and you moved him over up the ground?
And when I got up,
Her calm demeanor and disconnected details raised immediate red flags. Heather claimed she went to bed that night while Robert was still alive. She said she found him the next morning, stabbed and lifeless, and that he must have done it to himself.
Nothing's done. We don't know. Nobody calls an ambulance. Nobody follows up and says there should be something. Even if, at the very least, ma'am, you got to look at this.
I understand. I know. I failed. I failed,
I'm not
and I
saying
know
that.
that.
I'm not saying that anybody failed. I'm just saying that.
It looks messed up.
Yeah, he.
I understand. Please know I understand.
Even if these injuries, and we don't know the extent of these injuries. Maybe these injuries are superficial. I don't know. But even if those injuries are superficial, at the very least, it's a cry for help if he did this to himself, right?
Do you know if it was in here where he ended up possibly hurting himself, or what had happened exactly, Heather?
yeah. Well, we were going to bed, and he was like, "It hurts. It hurts." And I put him in bed, and
And is there any cut marks on him at that time?
I didn't notice any at that time. And then I went a little later, and he was like, "It hurts." And there was blood on his. And I was like, of course, I said dirty words.
I have some major concerns with that. I have some major concerns that you cleaned him up and took that shirt off and cleaned him up, then leave him that time again too. That would have been the perfect time to call someone.
I know. Yeah, like I told you, I know.
Okay.
What the did you do?
Did this happen whenever you were moving him on your shirt? You have some of this.
I'm sure it happened when I moved him. Or when I took it off of him and I cleaned it up.
He was wearing a shirt.
Again, now I can't find it. He was wearing a shirt and a jacket.
So with all that said, and I'm just going to kind of warn you ahead of time, they're going to probably collect your shirt, take pictures of you and your hands. Just because
I didn't do anything.
It's okay. It's just procedure.
I didn't do anything.
And I just wanted to.
So that's some of the biggest concerns, is that his body's been manipulated in some form or way. The weapon that was used in this has been manipulated in some sort of way. I don't think you're a bad person. Okay? I can tell in your eyes that you're
But you think I did?
a good person. But things are not adding up. I think you have more to tell me, right?
I don't have anything else to say. I have nothing left. I've told you all I have.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing left. Nothing.
With no eyewitnesses, no confession, and only circumstantial inconsistencies, police had little to arrest her on. For most people, the case would have faded into cold case files, but not this one. Behind the scenes, the Farmington Police Department kept digging. They reviewed texts, re-examined forensics, consulted with medical examiners, and tracked Heather's behavior in the days and years that followed. What they found was a woman hiding behind a mask, one carefully crafted by her role as an educator, a wife, a community figure. But cracks were forming, and eventually the mask slipped. Nearly 5 years after Robert Hofer's death, on April 1st, 2025, detectives made their move. Heather Fernandez Hofer was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence.
You have an arrest. Put your hands behind your back, Heather.
What do I have a warrant for?
For homicide.
By then, the public had nearly forgotten the case, but the officers hadn't, nor had the family, and certainly not the prosecutors who had spent years dissecting every thread of Heather's story. What changed? Why now? What evidence did they finally uncover that transformed this from a mystery into a murder case? And how does a wife, someone trained to nurture, to protect, Become the prime suspect in her husband's brutal death? The answers, as it turns out, are as unsettling as the crime itself. Because what started as a call for help was really a call to cover up. And what looked like a grieving widow might just be a killer hiding in plain sight. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of a case built on deception, marital secrets, and the relentless pursuit of justice. This is the story of Robert Hofer, a man whose death whispered the truth, even when no one else would. Before tragedy turned their home into a crime scene, Robert Hofer and Heather Fernandez Hofer appeared to live an ordinary life in Farmington, New Mexico. On paper, they were a respectable couple. Robert, a 49-year-old U.S. Navy veteran, known for his quiet demeanor and love of reading, and Heather, a well-liked third-grade teacher at McCormick Elementary School. Their house on South Ivy Avenue sat in a peaceful neighborhood where no one expected anything sinister to unfold. But behind the closed doors of that home, tensions were simmering, and a quiet storm was beginning to build. Robert had served his country with honor. He was a man of discipline, structure, and quiet integrity. After his time in the Navy, he transitioned into civilian life with modest ambitions. He wasn't flashy, just focused. He enjoyed books, his routines, and the sense of control he had carved out after years of service. His role as a stepfather added another layer to his responsibilities. Heather, on the other hand, was known for her warm smile in the classroom. Parents trusted her, students adored her, and fellow teachers admired her dedication. But those who knew her more intimately noticed a different side, one marked by intensity, a tendency toward control, and a sharp tongue when things didn't go her way. To outsiders, the couple seemed solid. But as with many relationships, the truth was far more complicated. According to investigators, cracks in their marriage began to surface well before that fatal night in 2020. Text messages between the two told a story of resentment, emotional distance, and unresolved conflict. There were frequent arguments about money, bills, responsibilities, and what each of them was contributing to the household. These weren't just petty fights. They pointed to a deep, growing divide between two people who had stopped communicating with trust. But it wasn't only about money. A particularly demeaning thread of messages revealed Heather mocking Robert for a humiliating moment, an incident involving bedwetting. Rather than offering compassion, she turned it into a weapon, ridiculing him and adding emotional salt to a private wound. These small, almost forgettable interactions, when added together, painted a picture of a strained marriage laced with humiliation and emotional manipulation. Meanwhile, Heather continued to maintain her image as the friendly teacher, a role she played effortlessly in public. No one at her school suspected that anything in her home life might be unraveling, but investigators would later describe her personality as high-functioning and image-conscious, noting how she compartmentalized her life, presenting one version of herself to the world and another behind closed doors. The day before Robert was found dead, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, at least not publicly. There was no domestic disturbance call, no neighbors heard shouting, and no one expected what was coming. But the toxic dynamics between them had reached a breaking point. Whether Heather had planned something or snapped in the heat of the moment remains a key question in the case. But what is clear now is that the seeds of this tragedy had been planted long before the stabbing. In retrospect, the signs were all there: emotional volatility, unresolved tension, and a relationship fractured beyond repair. Yet no one intervened. No one thought to look deeper. And perhaps that's what makes this case so haunting. It wasn't a crime of sudden chaos. It was the quiet decay of a marriage, eroding over years until it collapsed in bloodshed. Robert Hofer never cried out for help, but his story is now being told piece by the very people who once believed they had no story at all. This was not just a death. It was a slow-motion tragedy hidden in plain sight. On the night of November 28, 2020, nothing seemed particularly unusual inside the home on South Ivy Avenue. There were no signs of forced entry, no sounds of a struggle heard by the neighbors. But by the following morning, that house would become the epicenter of a murder investigation. Heather Fernandez Hofer made a 911 call at 8:24 a.m. on November 29th. her voice eerily composed as she reported that her husband, Robert Hofer, was unresponsive. She claimed he had stabbed himself, not once, not twice, but 3 times. When first responders arrived, they found Robert lying on the bed, already cold to the touch, with 3 deep stab wounds in his torso. It was a gruesome sight. Blood had soaked into the bedding, and there was no visible weapon in sight. Heather greeted the officers calmly, with no apparent signs of panic or distress. Her demeanor struck many as odd, too restrained for a woman who had allegedly just found her husband dead. From the beginning, Heather's story didn't make sense. She told police that Robert had stabbed himself in the computer room the night before. She claimed that after the stabbing, she helped clean him up, per his wishes, and then they went to bed in separate rooms. According to her, she discovered him lifeless the next morning, but the forensic evidence told a different story. Investigators found no traces of blood in the computer room or anywhere else outside the bedroom. No blood trail, no cleanup supplies, just Robert's body in the bed and the clear evidence that he had likely died there. Even more baffling, the 3 stab wounds were severe and deep, making it improbable they were self-inflicted. The angles and depth were inconsistent with suicide, and medical examiners would later testify that the wounds resembled those made in an attack, not an act of self-harm. Moreover, there was no knife found near the body. For someone who had allegedly stabbed themselves, the weapon had mysteriously vanished. As police continued questioning Heather, the inconsistencies piled up. Her timeline was jumbled. She struggled to explain what she had done during the critical hours between when Robert was allegedly stabbed and when she made the 911 call. At one point, she suggested Robert had been awake and refused medical attention. At another, she implied she had left him alone, unsure of what he was doing. Her narrative shifted subtly but frequently, raising more suspicion with each retelling. Investigators searched the home thoroughly. They discovered several blood-stained items that had been cleaned and stashed away, further suggesting tampering. But the most significant breakthrough came from digital evidence. Text messages between Robert and Heather from the days leading up to his death showed growing hostility. They argued about finances, trust issues, and resentment. One particularly chilling message from Robert read, "You scare me sometimes." Another showed Heather mocking him after an embarrassing bedwetting incident, which had clearly humiliated him and sparked a bitter fight. Despite the troubling evidence, the case stalled. With no confession, no eyewitnesses, and a lack of forensic smoking guns, police were left with circumstantial evidence, strong, but not airtight. Heather remained free, returning to her teaching job and maintaining a facade of normalcy. But detectives weren't ready to let it go. For the next 4.5 years, the Farmington Police Department kept the case open. They revisited the autopsy, reanalyzed the blood patterns, and reviewed every statement Heather had given. They consulted forensic experts and even tracked down former colleagues and family members to build a fuller psychological profile of Heather. The case file grew thicker, and the inconsistencies in her story only deepened. Then, in March 2025, after a new round of forensic analysis and a full review by the district attorney's office, the case shifted from cold to active. Prosecutors believed there was now enough to file charges. On April 1st, 2025, almost 5 years after Robert's death, Heather Fernandez Hofer was arrested for second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. She was taken into custody without incident, processed, and released on pretrial supervision the following day. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. A beloved elementary school teacher, now the prime suspect in her husband's brutal murder. But even as she awaited trial, questions lingered. What really happened inside that house on the night of November 28th? Was this a calculated murder, a crime of passion, or something more sinister that no one had yet uncovered? But to the detectives and prosecutors who had worked tirelessly on the case, it was the moment they had long prepared for. Now the burden was to present a compelling narrative in court, that Heather had not only killed her husband, but had spent nearly half a decade misleading the world about what truly happened that night. The preliminary hearing was set for April 9th, 2025. The prosecution laid out the evidence they had built painstakingly over the years. The core of their case rested on 2 pillars: the forensic inconsistencies at the scene of Robert's death and the documented history of marital conflict between the couple. They introduced text messages showing increasing tension, highlighting Robert's statements that suggested he feared Heather. The prosecution argued that Heather's calm demeanor during the 911 call, her contradictory statements to police, and the absence of a weapon at the scene all pointed toward premeditation, or at the very least intentional deception after the fact. They also introduced expert testimony from forensic pathologists who emphasized the implausibility of Robert's wounds being self-inflicted. The angles, the depth, and the location of the stab wounds suggested they were delivered by someone else, likely while Robert was lying down or incapacitated. Crime scene analysts testified about the blood patterns and how they conflicted with Heather's version of events. There was no blood trail from the supposed stabbing location in the computer room to the bed, no discarded weapon, and no cleanup supplies indicating the kind of mess a stabbing would leave behind. Everything, they said, pointed to Robert being attacked in his bed, possibly while he slept. The defense, however, had a different narrative. They painted Heather as a grieving widow whose trauma had caused her to misremember and miscommunicate during the early stages of the investigation. They argued that there was no physical evidence directly linking her to the stabbing. No fingerprints on a weapon, no witness, no definitive proof she had done it. Her defense attorney pointed out that while her statements were inconsistent, they could be interpreted as the result of shock and confusion, not guilt. They also leaned heavily on the lack of motive, insisting that while the couple had disagreements, nothing indicated Heather was capable of such a violent act. What made the trial especially complex was the lack of hard forensic evidence tying Heather to the act itself. Everything was circumstantial. Still, the prosecution believed that the weight of inconsistencies, the improbable suicide theory, and the years of deceptive behavior made for a compelling case. They highlighted Heather's return to her normal life in the years after Robert's death, her failure to follow up on the investigation, and her efforts to maintain her reputation while keeping the truth buried. Heather Fernandez Hofer remains free under pretrial supervision as she awaits further hearings. The legal process is still unfolding, and no conviction or sentencing has been reported. But one thing is clear, this isn't just a trial about physical evidence, it's about narrative, about perception, and about whether a jury will believe the woman once trusted with the care of children could be capable of killing her husband and covering it up for years. The courtroom has become the final stage for a marriage that ended in blood, silence, and suspicion. And now it's the jury's turn to decide where the truth really lies. As the trial loomed, the arrest of Heather Fernandez Hofer sent shockwaves not just through Farmington, but through everyone who had followed the slow-burning case of Robert Hofer's death. For many, it was as if time had rewound. What had seemed like a closed chapter, an unresolved tragedy with no clear answers, was suddenly reopened, filled with fresh scrutiny, new questions, and public fascination. Yet despite the long-awaited charges, the aftermath was anything but simple. It was a storm of legal uncertainty, emotional turmoil, and a community forced to reassess everything it thought it knew. Heather's arrest pulled the curtain back on what had been a remarkably composed public life. For nearly 5 years, she continued to work as an elementary school teacher, shaping young minds in the same calm and composed demeanor that had once thrown detectives off. After her release from custody in April 2025, she was swiftly placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of her trial. The duality of her image, a nurturing educator and an alleged murderer, sent ripples through the town. The aftermath also exposed the quiet power of persistence in investigative work. Farmington police never fully closed the case. They kept the file active, updated it with new forensic insights, and coordinated closely with the district attorney's office to ensure that no lead went unexplored. The slow drip of progress, through text analysis, forensic reinterpretation, and psychological profiling, eventually formed a compelling enough case for prosecution. For those working behind the scenes, it was a testament to the importance of patience and justice. However, public opinion remained divided. Some felt that the state was trying to force a conviction in a case that lacked a smoking gun. They pointed to the absence of eyewitnesses, DNA evidence, or a murder weapon. Others argued that the very absence of these things, coupled with Heather's carefully crafted story and behavior, pointed more strongly to guilt. After all, who else would have had the opportunity, the motive, and the means? And why would the truth of that night remain so elusive if she had nothing to hide? As Heather awaits her next court dates, life for everyone touched by this case remains suspended. Her reputation is shattered, her future uncertain, and her past now under a microscope. The school community, once her safe haven, has distanced itself. Her career is in limbo, and her name is no longer associated with lesson plans or parent-teacher meetings, but with blood, deception, and murder charges. For Robert Hofer, there is no second chance. No chance to defend himself or tell his version of events. But his story lives on through the voices of those seeking justice on his behalf. His quiet life and quiet death has become a public reckoning for what lies beneath seemingly ordinary relationships. The case of Heather Fernandez Hofer is far from over. The courtroom may determine her legal guilt or innocence, but for many, the emotional verdict has already been cast. And in the silence left behind by Robert's death, one question continues to echo. What really happened that night? And how long can one person carry the weight of a lie? The murder of Robert Hofer is a case that leaves behind more than just questions. It leaves behind a sense of unease. Not because the truth is unknowable, but because it may have always been hiding in plain sight. For nearly 5 years, Heather Fernandez Hofer lived as though nothing had happened, teaching children, attending community functions, smiling in photographs. And yet, beneath the surface, the truth was slowly unraveling, one thread at a time. This wasn't a case of a stranger breaking in, a random act of violence, or a spur-of-the-moment argument caught on camera. It was subtle, quiet, almost surgical in its deception. A husband found stabbed in bed, a wife with an implausible explanation, a crime scene that contradicted every word spoken in that first 911 call. Still, it took nearly half a decade for investigators to feel confident enough to move forward. That timeline speaks volumes, not just about the complexity of the case, but about the challenges of prosecuting a murder built on motive, manipulation, and misdirection rather than overt evidence. There's something haunting about a suspect who goes on living normally after an alleged crime. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that killers don't always look like monsters. That danger doesn't always come in the form of a stranger in the night. Sometimes it comes from someone familiar. Someone who smiles at you across the dinner table. Someone who tucks your children into bed. In Robert Hofer's case, justice has been long delayed, but not forgotten. His death might have gone unsolved if not for the relentless efforts of law enforcement who refused to close the file, who saw the gaps in Heather's story and kept pulling. It's a testament to the power of persistence, and a warning about the cost of ignoring red flags. Yet despite the charges, the case is still in motion. Heather Fernandez Hofer has not been convicted. The trial remains ongoing. In the eyes of the law, she is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But public opinion has already begun to tilt, driven by inconsistencies, evidence, and the eerie calm with which she responded to tragedy. As viewers and as a society, we're left to examine more than just the evidence. We're asked to look at the masks people wear, to question the difference between appearance and reality, and to recognize that justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it can be life-altering. The story of Robert Hofer is one of silence, suspicion, and eventual revelation. It reminds us that truth can hide for years in the shadows, that it can be buried beneath routine, reputation, and time. But eventually it fights its way to the surface. It claws through the lies, the alibis, and the calm faces. Because truth, no matter how long it waits, always demands to be heard. And no matter how carefully the story was crafted, justice has a way of unraveling even the most convincing lies. We'll be watching this case closely, and we'll continue to update you as more details emerge. If you found this story as chilling and thought-provoking as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of true crime. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and stay curious.
Well, we are learning new information about the death of 19-year-old Sade Robinson.
Her body parts later surfaced from Milwaukee to Illinois. I do want to warn you before we continue that some of the details that I'm going to discuss that took place during that questioning is gruesome and can be disturbing for some.
On April 18th, you found something.
Correct.
What did you find?
Torso and arm.
He tried to get rid of everything. He tried to cover up. And what does he do after he gets home? He powers up his phone and he sends a text. Morning, how's work going? Disgusting.
On April 1st, 2024, 19-year-old Carlina Robinson was looking forward to her first date with a man named Maxwell Anderson. She was young, vibrant, and full of promise. A criminal justice student who had dreams of building a life that helped others. That night, she dressed up, got in her car, and headed into Milwaukee to meet a man she barely knew. No one, not even Sade herself, could have imagined she was walking straight into the hands of a monster. The two went to a couple of restaurants, Twisted Fisherman and Duke's on Water. They laughed, had drinks, and were seen chatting comfortably. At around 9:24 p.m., surveillance cameras caught them pulling into Anderson's home. After that moment, Sade Robinson was never seen alive again. The next day, her family grew concerned. She hadn't returned calls or texts. Her phone was suddenly silent. And when her burned car was found abandoned, the fear turned to horror. Hours later, the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office received a chilling call. A severed human leg had washed ashore at Warnemont Park. Investigators would soon confirm the impossible. The leg belonged to Sade Robinson.
They walked down the S-curve from Sheridan, started walking south just for fun, rough day on the beach. As they were walking, see that leg right there? Yeah. Said that it was up about approximately where the end of that stick, that branch is. By the bushes right there. Yeah, bushes, said that they saw it up there.
Sounds like up on the hill, kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
So said that him and his buddy, who's in my squad right now, walked out, called us, and then when we came back, it was about, maybe 7 feet east on the rock. I moved it just for evidence purposes.
Okay, so this gets swept away?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I documented it well on body cam with different angles of where it was.
Okay, cool.
DNA results on the foot are pending, but DNA results confirm the severed leg is Robinson's.
It wasn't just a murder. It was brutal, calculated, and senseless. Over the coming days, more body parts were found scattered across Milwaukee County, in parks, alleys, and even far across state lines in Waukegan, Illinois.
A man discovered a severed leg with pink toenail polish at Warnemont Park in Cudahy. The same place investigators would later say Robinson's phone was pinging between 3 a.m. and 4:30. April 5th, less than a mile from the car fire. A body part was found in the same area of 30th and Lisbon. April 6th, remains were discovered at 31st and Galena. The next day, more remains were found at 31st and Walnut. At one point, Kiki says she found a blanket with Robinson's face on it lying on the ground in Galena Park.
I looked down and I seen Sade's face. She flipped over.
Something that won't stop is the search for Sade's body. Gail joined the family and friends along the shoreline Thursday afternoon. Investigators say they were taking a sonar boat out on the lake to look for more body parts on Friday.
Her remains were dumped like trash, desecrated beyond recognition. Some parts were never found, most notably her head. The community was shaken. How could something so gruesome happen to someone so kind? And why? Police quickly zeroed in on Maxwell Anderson. Just 48 hours after that fateful night, he was arrested.
I asked Mr. Anderson to shut off his vehicle, to which he complied. I then asked Mr. Anderson to step out of the vehicle, to which again he complied. I immediately grabbed onto Mr. Anderson and I took him into custody. I placed him into handcuffs.
The charges that followed read like a horror novel. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, arson, hiding a corpse. But Anderson pleaded not guilty. No confession, no explanation, and no remorse.
Accused murderer Maxwell Anderson pleaded not guilty to all charges in the Sade Robinson case.
And did you understand it?
Yes, Your Honor. Knowledge receipt, enter a not guilty plea subject to our substitution request.
What followed was a painstaking investigation. A digital trail of data points, GPS records, surveillance footage, and chilling witness statements.
Scared now to kind of want to come down here with my dog, and do what we do every day, because now it's, am I going to come down here and be the next one that's going to find more body parts?
I would have been devastated. I can't even imagine what their family feels like. My heart's going to cry for this. I can't. It's got to stop.
We fly these balloons through the pain. Sade Carlina Robinson is her name.
Justice for Sade! Justice for Sade!
The deeper investigators dug, the darker it got. A confidential informant even claimed that Anderson had planned to kill Sade weeks before they met. And yet, as the trial began in May 2025, more than a year after Sade vanished, there were still more questions than answers. The motive remained a mystery. Key remains were still missing. And Sade's family, despite their strength, were forced to sit in the same courtroom as the man accused of tearing their daughter apart. This case isn't just a tragedy. It's a chilling reflection of something deeper. The violence that continues to haunt Black and brown women across America, and the silence that too often follows. This is the story of Sade Robinson, a daughter, a student, a light that should still be here, and the date that ended in dismemberment, death, and a fight for justice that's far from over. Born on May 10, 2004, Carlina Robinson was more than just a name in a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a dreamer, a student at Milwaukee Area Technical College. Sade was pursuing a degree in criminal justice, inspired to build a career that made a difference. Her passion for fairness, justice, and helping others burned bright. Her mother, Sheena Scarborough, described her as the kind of young woman who lit up every room.
I missed you so much, baby girl. Mommy loved you so much. And I'm so proud of you.
Choking back tears on a cold spring day, Sade Robinson's mother, Sheena Scarborough, shares her pain.
Sade had dreams of working in law enforcement or becoming an advocate for others. She had no history of trouble, no enemies, just plans. She worked part-time jobs, stayed close to her family, and like many college students, used dating apps to meet new people. It was through one of those apps that she met Maxwell Anderson. Anderson, a 34-year-old Milwaukee man, lived a life under the radar. Not much was known about his past, but what has since come to light is deeply unsettling. A confidential informant would later tell police that Anderson had allegedly spoken about killing a woman, a full month before Sade's murder.
In these pages, there's a confidential informant who told police they had been friends with Maxwell Anderson for years and claims Anderson told them he was plotting to kill Sade Robinson about a month before her death.
That April evening, what should have been a simple first date became a descent into horror. It was a night that Sade, full of trust and youth, couldn't have anticipated would be her last. Her mother recalled the last message she got from Sade. "I love you, Mom." Hours later, her daughter's life was taken in the most unimaginable way. April 1st, 2024, 6 p.m., Sade and Maxwell Anderson meet for their date. They visit Twisted Fisherman and Duke's on Water, lively spots in Milwaukee. Security footage shows them eating, laughing, even toasting drinks. 9:24 p.m., the couple arrives at Anderson's home. Surveillance captures them pulling into his driveway. That's the last time anyone sees Sade. Later that night, Anderson's neighbor reported hearing strange noises and seeing flickering lights from the garage. But no one called the police. April 2nd, 2024. Early morning, Sade's phone is on the move. GPS data shows it bouncing across several areas of Milwaukee County, including Pleasant Valley Park and Warnemont Park. Then the signal goes dark. That afternoon, fire crews are called to an abandoned car in Milwaukee. It's in flames. The car is traced back to Sade Robinson.
Prosecutors say these two women in the area witnessed someone light a car on fire behind a nearby abandoned building. The one wearing blue flailing her arms, trying to get anyone's attention. A different angle shows someone with a large tan backpack walking away from the fire.
Panic begins to spread. 6 p.m., a leg, cleanly severed, is discovered at Warnemont Park, near the Lake Michigan shoreline. It's later confirmed to belong to Sade. April 3rd to 18th, over the next 2 weeks, police find additional remains in various locations. A torso, an arm, dumped in alleyways, hidden near dumpsters, and along remote trails. Some of her remains are found 50 miles away in Illinois. Her head remains missing. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide.
This is sort of an unusual autopsy, correct? In that you were doing it over the period of a time period, right?
It is very unusual.
how many times have you had a situation like this?
Once before.
The lower extremity amputation transection points, were you able to come to any additional conclusions or make any additional observations from examination of the torso as opposed to just examining, for example, the leg?
Not much more. Again, the right leg was cut, or the femur was broken, and that was the transection site. The left leg was disarticulated, meaning that the ball of the femur was removed from the pelvis.
The brutality shocks even veteran investigators. Arson experts confirm her car was intentionally set on fire, an attempt to erase evidence.
During excavation, I located what appeared to be remnants of a stuffed animal, green in color, at least majority of it green, that had survived. And as soon as I turned it over, I was overwhelmed by an odor consistent with the possible presence of a petroleum distillate. It smelled like, sometimes we can't tell what it is, but it could be gasoline, it could be lighter fluid, it could be any kind of petroleum distillate. But whatever this stuffed animal was appeared to have been saturated with it because it had weight to it. And it was an overwhelming odor that I experienced.
By April 4th, police had enough. Maxwell Anderson was arrested. The investigation moved swiftly. With surveillance footage, phone data, and license plate readers, detectives built a chilling timeline.
He needs that car gone. He needs her gone. 12:47 a.m. is when we see the car leaving the house, going southbound, exiting onto Euclid, and from there you saw an exhausting amount of videos showing the car driving away from his house, northbound to the north side of Milwaukee. That was 12:49, 12:51 going northbound on 35th Street, passing Badger Ham, 12:53 a.m. northbound, passing 35th and Greenfield. That is her car. We know it's her car because this camera happens to have a license plate reader.
The erratic travel path of her phone was suspicious. It pinged locations near parks and dumpsters, areas where remains were later found. Second, footage showed Anderson's car leaving his home in the middle of the night, multiple times, matching the phone's movements. He was allegedly seen buying cleaning supplies and visiting remote locations. Police executed a search warrant at his home. What they found was damning: blood evidence in his garage, DNA matching Sade on tools, and signs of an attempted cleanup. A large freezer had recently been removed. Neighbors told detectives they'd seen him dragging heavy bags outside that night. Adding to the horror, a confidential source claimed Anderson had told them a month earlier that he wanted to kill a woman and make her disappear. That source later came forward when the headlines hit. On April 12, 2024, formal charges were filed. The criminal complaint painted a picture of premeditation and sadistic violence. Still, Anderson pled not guilty. He refused to speak. His defense team cited lack of motive, but prosecutors didn't need one. The physical evidence was staggering. Despite all this, one thing remained deeply troubling. A significant portion of Sade's body, including her head, has never been recovered. On May 27, 2025, more than a year after the brutal murder of 19-year-old Sade Robinson, the courtroom in Milwaukee County was filled with anticipation and quiet tension. Family, reporters, court TV cameras, and the broader community watched as jury selection began for the man accused of dismembering her, 34-year-old Maxwell Anderson. Anderson entered the courtroom in a neatly pressed suit. His hands were uncuffed at the defense table. He sat silently beside his attorneys, betraying no emotion, no sign of regret, no hint of nervousness. Across the aisle, Sade's family wore buttons with her picture, their expressions unreadable, but their pain visible. Over the next few days, the court sifted through dozens of potential jurors. Some were dismissed for knowing too much from the media. Others admitted they couldn't stomach the details. Eventually, 12 were selected to decide Anderson's fate. 12 strangers now responsible for bringing justice to a girl who would never speak again. From day one, the prosecution came prepared. Their opening statement was blunt and chilling.
He tried to get rid of everything. He tried to cover up. And what does he do after he gets home? He powers up his phone and he sends a text. Morning, how's work going? Disgusting. right after he's just burned her car, killed her. Why did he do that? He's covering up. He's trying to cover his tracks. He's trying to make sure everything seems normal. Same reason he went to work that day. Couldn't let his routine go out. He needed to maintain appearances, despite the fact that in the middle of the night, he's out cutting up a human body and burning a car.
This was a first date that turned into a murder. Not of passion, but of planning. They introduced the evidence. Surveillance footage, digital data, forensic traces, witness testimony, and the locations of the scattered remains. It painted a picture not just of a killing, but of a calculated, methodical cover-up. Sade's final known moments were shown on screen. The jury watched her walk into Twisted Fisherman with Anderson. Later, they saw the pair driving to Duke's on Water. Finally, they observed the car pulling into Anderson's driveway. And then a gap, a void of silence, time unaccounted for, until her car was found on fire and her dismembered leg appeared at Warnemont Park. Testimony followed from forensic experts. They explained the DNA match between Sade's blood and samples found in Anderson's garage. One analyst testified that cleaning agents were found near a blood trail, suggesting an attempted cleanup. A fire investigator described how the burning of Sade's car was clearly intentional, a deliberate act meant to destroy evidence. The prosecution's most jarring piece came in the form of GPS data from Anderson's phone. Prosecutors showed how his movements on April 2nd aligned almost perfectly with where body parts were later found. Alleyways, parks, even a route south into Illinois. Then came the confidential informant, a man who knew Anderson personally. He told the court that Anderson had allegedly spoken in March of 2024 about wanting to make a woman disappear. The jury leaned in at that. No one wanted to believe it, that the killing was premeditated, but the words hung in the air like smoke. The defense tried to cast doubt. They claimed the case was circumstantial, that no one saw the killing happen, that Anderson had no clear motive. They questioned the informant's credibility, suggested the surveillance timeline wasn't airtight, and argued that the evidence linking Anderson to the disposal sites was not enough to prove he committed the murder.
It's not what Mr. Vance Krzan says. It's not what I say. It's really what all of you say once you go back in that jury room and carefully consider the evidence or lack of evidence. And it's important to evaluate each one of these counts separately. And the judge told you, as hard as that can be in cases like this, to try to check your emotions at the door. I know it's hard. I don't think any of us envy any of aspect of what our jobs are. We all have a job to do. The most important job is yours, and it's to check your emotion at the door, put aside passion, put aside prejudice, and look at the case from the evidence. That's all I ask you to do. And on each count, render a separate verdict, unanimously. You can make a request when you go back there of the judge to view videos again, if that's something that you'd like to do, or look at DNA reports or look at photographs. You can make those requests, and I would encourage you to do so.
But the jury wasn't convinced. Each day, the weight of evidence grew heavier. Sade's mother, Sheena Scarborough, sat through every moment. When she took the stand, she didn't just speak as a mother. She spoke as a woman whose daughter had been hunted, butchered, and abandoned. He took more than her life, she told the jury. He took our future. The prosecution rested its case with a haunting reminder. Maxwell Anderson didn't just kill Sade Robinson. He tried to erase her. As the trial moved into closing arguments, the community held its breath. Whether it ended in conviction or not, the trial itself had already left an irreversible mark on Milwaukee. A reminder of the violence women, especially Black women, face, and how easily those stories can be buried unless someone fights to tell them. The verdict was yet to come, but the message was already clear. This was not just a murder trial, it was a reckoning. When the courtroom doors finally closed and the testimony faded, what remained was the grief, not just of a mother who had lost her only daughter, but of an entire community haunted by a single question: why? The trial may have given the public a glimpse into the horror Sade endured, but it could never explain the mind of the man who did it. Even as the prosecution stacked up damning evidence, even as the jury nodded along with expert after expert, Maxwell Anderson never gave an explanation, not to the court, not to Sade's family, not even to his lawyers. And for the Robinson family, silence has become a second sentence. Without a full confession, the motive behind murder remains speculative. Prosecutors argued it was premeditated. The confidential informant claimed Anderson had made threats weeks in advance. But the why, the deepest and most important question, still looms unanswered. Even more devastating is the fact that some of Saad's remains, including her head, have never been recovered. Despite pleas from her mother and search efforts from law enforcement, the final pieces of her body remain lost. "We can't even bury her whole," Sheena Scarborough said through tears in a televised interview. "We don't have that piece." In the weeks following the trial, Milwaukee saw a groundswell of action. Community groups rallied in Saad's name. Billboards and flyers popped up with her face and the words, "Justice for Saad." The tragic story sparked broader conversations about violence against Black and brown women, and how often their cases are overlooked or underinvestigated. Her mother turned her heartbreak into purpose. She launched the Shades Voice Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness, pushing for policy reform, and supporting families of missing or murdered Black women and girls. Their first major event, a candlelight vigil on Saad's 20th birthday, drew hundreds of people from across the state. Saad's old college created a memorial scholarship in her name, a yearly award for young women pursuing criminal justice. It was a small but powerful tribute to what she could have been, and the internet responded too. Hashtags like #JusticeForSaad and #SayHerName flooded platforms like Twitter and TikTok. Influencers, true crime creators, and activists began amplifying her story, ensuring it would never be forgotten, even as the news cycle moved on. But for Saad's loved ones, time hasn't made things easier. Every holiday, every birthday, every silent moment reminds them of the girl who was once so full of life and laughter. They visit her memorial, they speak at events, they search wooded trails for any trace of what was left behind. Meanwhile, Maxwell Anderson remains in jail, facing the possibility of life without parole. His sentencing is pending the final outcome of the trial.
He did it because he wanted to do it. All the stab wounds near her breast and on her torso, that was done out of a sick desire to do harm to her. That's the only reason that is done.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in count 1 of the information. As to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of mutilating a corpse as charged in count 2 of the information. As to count 3, we, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of arson of property other than a building as charged in count 3 of the information. As to count 4, we, the jury, find the defendant, Maxwell Anderson, guilty of hiding a corpse as charged in count 4 of the information.
No sentence could match the crime. And as the Robinson family continues their fight for full justice, they do so with clarity. They will never let Saad be reduced to just another headline. She is not just a victim, she is a movement, and that movement is growing. From the heart of Milwaukee to the rest of the country, Saad Robinson's story is no longer just a tragedy, it is a catalyst, a reason for change, a call to action. And through that legacy, her voice will never be silenced again. Saad Robinson's story didn't end with her death. Her voice, her light, and her legacy continue to move people. In the wake of her murder, her family launched Shades Voice Foundation, advocacy group fighting for missing women of color, demanding accountability, and pressuring law enforcement to act with urgency. They've hosted vigils, marches, and partnered with national groups to push for better resources and awareness. Her mother pleads publicly, not just for justice in court, but for the return of her daughter's missing remains. "We deserve to bury her whole," she said during a recent interview. "We deserve peace." The community of Milwaukee has not forgotten. Street murals, memorials, and scholarship funds now bear Saad's name. She is a symbol, not of tragedy, but of strength, justice, and change. And for true crime followers, her case is more than a story. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles, it flirts, it invites you to dinner, and never lets you leave. Maxwell Anderson's trial is still unfolding. The truth of what happened in that house and why may never fully be known. But one thing is certain, Sade deserved better. Her story forces us to ask hard questions. How do we protect our daughters? How do we hold monsters accountable? And how do we ensure no one slips through the cracks of justice? Sade Robinson was 19. She had dreams, she had time, and she had a future that someone decided to destroy. Let us remember her not as a victim, but as a fighter. Someone whose life, though short, is now changing others.